as we continue to move forward, I think a real challenge, and we've been talking about this at the executive team, is now we're in a process of ever more fine-tuning this organization. We've taken great strides over the last 3 years to really accomplish some terrific things, but now it's a process of fine-tuning, and that's actually even harder because the things that are big that need fixed or need course corrections or we need to take it to the next level, those are generally pretty easy to identify. It's the fine-tuning that really is painstaking, a lot of questioning. There's a lot of different paths we could go down, but it will pay huge dividends for us as we continue to push and strive for excellence in this community.
I'm Andy Welsh, Assistant to the Town Manager, and here today to give you an update on the 2014 Citizen Survey results. So in 2013, we did a customized resident survey, and with that survey came back some results that we wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive on. So today we're going to kind of highlight what those areas were in 2013, provide an overview, and then let you know what our next steps are going to be. So in 2013, these are the areas that we identified that came back with results that we wanted to inquire a little bit more about why the results were maybe a little bit lower than we would like to see, and ask some more detailed questions. So we started out the survey with just a general quality of life question that we also asked last year just to see a comparison. So in all of the slides you will see blue is in 2014 and the brown is from 2013 results. So you can see we're staying about the same on the quality of life. And one of the questions we followed up was emergency preparedness. And in looking at maybe why the results have gone up quite a bit, we sent out the survey in 2013 about the time we were maybe dealing with some issues with fluoride. We've also been doing some more social media campaign and outreach about our emergency management preparedness. So we're thinking that maybe that those have impacted and caused those numbers to go up this year. So the next area we focused on was communications. And we asked a question about how are our residents hearing about where are they getting their news sources. And so what I found that was interesting is a lot of the people that responded like print in addition to word of mouth. And most of the responses that we got back were mailed responses as opposed to an online option that we offered this year. So how our residents like to hear from us, again, prefer that mail option. In terms of where they'd like some more information. If you're curious about the other category, residents were interested in us getting more on TV, local news stations, maybe on direct TV, which is something that they were interested in learning a little bit more about. And again, only about 9.5% of our respondents responded online, so that might have some impact in terms of using the text and phone applications. So the next area we went a little bit into was water services. We had some feedback in 2013 about our water quality. So wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that. Some of the research that we've looked into, the cost of water, we're not sure if residents really understand that their cost of water is rolled up into their utility bill, which includes solid waste, wastewater, and water, whether they know exactly what they're paying for their water. And according to the recent Tempe cost of survey study, we're the second lowest water rate in the valley after, let's see, I think that's after Tempe or Chandler, after Chandler. So, and in talking to some of our water professionals that we have on staff, there's a general perception in the valley that water taste and odor is not very high. So I think that some of the numbers that you're seeing in response to our water quality are pretty standard across the valley. So the next area that we dived a little bit into was parks and recreation. And so as you can see, these are some of the questions that we asked last year and then repeated again this year. And the two major areas that people responded for reasons not participating in a program or activity were 48% cited lack of time and 43% cited lack of awareness. And respondents could select multiple options. So that's just an interesting little tidbit into maybe why they may or may not be utilizing our facilities or activities. So next area we went into was we asked residents for the top 3 most important recreation amenities they would like us to see in the community. A lake, a multi-use lake would be for non-motorized boating activities. And so that's some information we went a little bit deeper into. And then the next area that we covered was what are the top 3 areas that the town could address to improve our user satisfaction. So this doesn't necessarily mean that people don't think our parks are safe. It just means that if they weren't safe, they probably wouldn't be using our parks. And so I think what this is very illustrative of Rod and his team looking at how making changes to our park ranger program, increasing visibility, trying to increase our ambassadorship, looking at our long-range infrastructure plan, how can we make our equipment and the amenities that we have at our parks more safe to increase the usership and to increase the popularity of our facilities. So then the next area that we covered was we were trying to get a little bit more information for the human services assessment. So we started asking some questions about human services. So this question was involving the use of services in the last 12 months. And it provides a really thumbnail sketch of the respondents. The low rate doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't using the services and that they're not needed. But we were just trying to get a sense because I don't think the community, the town has ever asked for any information about our human services. So the next question we asked was, where are you getting those services? And then are you receiving them from the government or a nonprofit? Again, just to kind of give us a sense of where the users are going for these types of services. So in conclusion, I just wanted to provide the highlights. What we're going to use this information for is Rod and his team for the Parks and Rec Master Plan implementation plan that he'll be presenting tomorrow, as well as some additional information for the implementation of some of the recommendations from the Human Services Needs Assessment. And then next year, we will be doing the standardized resident survey like we did in 2013 so that we can continue to compare our results every 2 years so we can tell if we're moving the needle. Services Needs Assessment, the council received a general overview report in the June 30th council meeting, and so wanted to come back and talk to you about recommendations and then use this opportunity to do a high-level overview of the recommendations, as well as then do a priority exercise in order to receive some direction from the council. So the original assessment scope for the consultant was that they were to look at our current available resources in the community, identify existing and possibly future gaps in the community, as well as come back with some recommendations and prioritized order of what the greatest needs are. So with that said, they came back with 9 areas that they felt that in their research we needed to, that they identified as our populations in greatest need. In terms of their response, they identified 2 additional populations that were not in the original scope that have some need in the community, and that is item 2, the mental health and substance abuse treatment group, and the culturally diverse individuals and families. Within those 9 areas, they identified 5 common identified gaps, whether it's information access, housing, transportation, basic necessity access, and healthcare access. And so with that, I want to take the time now. We're going to talk about the recommendations, then we're going to go through an exercise, and then we're going to come back and debrief. So in front of you, you have this very colorful spreadsheet. And so these items are recommendations that need further direction from the council. So on the sheet, you will see that there are green highlighted items, and those items are possible work plan items for the Human Relations Commission, and the items in blue are items that staff needs further direction on. And on your last page, there's items in white, and those are items that we're already working on implementing at a policy level or that we can easily implement for you. So I've grouped the items together in like items. The numbers that you see are the recommendations from priority order that were in the report. So for example, the first recommendation was recommendation number 1 in priority order from the report. So some of these are connected, such as all the funding related recommendations are grouped together. Even if you have an item that's number 15, it was still related to funding. So I was trying to help group them together as you're reviewing the recommendations. So the areas that I identified in categories are the funding, healthcare, employment and volunteerism, the armed forces, outreach and communication, and then it's broken down by regional partnership recommendations. So that's homeless, low income, volunteerism, senior services, and prevention. So with that, just like in the video, what we're asking you today is the power of focus to help us narrow down what you would like us to work on first. There were over 70 recommendations in the report, so it's a lot to digest. So not all of these items on here would necessarily be from that town staff will take on. Some of them will be partnerships or discussions we will facilitate. And the items that are for the Human Relations Commission, neighborhood services staff and town manager's office staff will support them, and depending on the nature of the recommendation, we would likely bring back the consultant that worked on the report in order to help provide guidance to that group. So depending on which recommendations you'd like us to work on, I know this is a lot of information. It'll take us about 6 to 24 months, depending on what they are, and we would come back with an action plan in terms of moving those forward.
Okay, Mayor Lewis, Council, thank you. I'm here to give you a brief update on the Santan character update, let you know where we're at and where we've been. One of the first things I kind of wanted to do is give you a little bit of background on the Santan character area, just so everybody understands why it's in place and the changes to it. The Santan character area was originally formed in 1998. The town was adding this entire area to the planning jurisdiction of the town, so in order to add it, we needed a plan for it, so that's what bore the Santan character area. At that point in time, and you'll see some aerials here in a minute, there was a lot of unique attributes to it. It was very rural, it was very agricultural in nature, there were some quality neighborhoods in place, and there was a real family atmosphere, and those types of things were meant to be carried forward into the Santan character plan. Over time, a lot of the rural agricultural setting has transformed into more of a rural or a suburban type development with subdivisions. Just to give you kind of an idea too, the Santan character area is 16.1 square miles. The town of Gilbert is 72.6 square miles. So the Santan character area is roughly 20% of the entire town. When you look at the Heritage District, it's 0.3 miles, square miles. The Gateway area is 7 square miles, and Morrison Ranch is about 2.3 square miles. So this is a very large master plan, or a very large character area by any stretch, and it's a very large character area in the town. The general plan does say that the Santan area is envisioned as a combination of rural residential and suburban neighborhoods. And you'll kind of see that as we go forward. When we were talking about these presentations, one of the questions came up, well, let's talk about the annexations. How did this kind of move into the town? In this slide, you can see the yellow piece. This was a piece that was annexed into the town prior to 1998. I'm using 1998 because that was the time the Santan character area started. The red has all been annexed since that, since 1998. The black is still in the county, so that is not part of the town of Gilbert. It's within our boundaries, but it is not, has not annexed into the town of Gilbert. This is about 200 acres, by the way. Trying to break it down just a little bit too, we from about 2002, 2003 on to about 2007 or 8, we had a lot of the fire district annexations. So this map begins to break down the fire district annexations. So the green, you can still see that yellow 200 acre piece. The green are what was annexed during what we call kind of that fire district annexation period of time. The red was either annexed before the fire district stuff or after the fire district stuff. So a lot of it, you can see some of these green areas that came in with the fire district annexations. If you look under those, you can see a lot of the existing large lot subdivisions. You'll start to see things like Greenfield Acres and some of the areas down here where we're talking about the Bordeaux subdivision, some of those things down in this area. The ones that did not annex with the fire subdivision or fire district issues that came in, you can start to see Dora Trails, Seville, Marbella, some of those areas where they were more suburban in nature came into annexed into the town for development purposes and not necessarily the fire annexation issues. The general plan, the land uses in the Santan character area look like this. What you'll see is this is residential 0 to 1 dwelling unit an acre, and that comprises about 30% of the Santan character area. The yellow, this yellow where you see Seville and some of Adora Trails. That's the 2 to 3.5 dwelling units per acre. That's about 45% of the district right now. And what you can see by looking at this map is a lot of the areas that are 0 to 1 have been developed as part of large lot subdivisions. The pieces that are left are more of the 2 to 3.5, which is sort of, well, it's Adora Trails, Seville, Marbella Vineyards, those kind of filling in. So if the plan sticks, if the development comes in and sticks to the general plan, you'll have lot sizes and densities similar to Layton Lakes all the way down and through those different colors. So you can see there's not a lot of 0 to 1 that's left in the Santan character area. This is a really good one to look at. So this is an aerial from 2000, pretty close to 1998, but you can start to see what was occurring at that point in time. You can start to see where Seville was coming in. You know, the corner at Chandler Heights and Higley was a dairy. Not a whole lot had occurred yet up around the bridges. You can start to see Trilogy filling in. Now watch sort of this area in here, and you'll see quite a change in that 5 years. So now you can really see where some of the additional subdivisions were starting to come in. We'll go back to 2000. So you'll be able to see really how much just developed in that 1 5-year period. You can really see a lot of residential development at some of those more dense 2 to 3.5 units per acre. The next aerial goes to 2014. So from 2005 to about 2014, obviously we went through the recession, but if you'll watch, you'll see kind of up in this area, and you'll see Adora Trails take off as well. So you can see a lot of the urban density kind of coming back in. Go back and do hit that one again. So you can really start to see a change in how it's been filling in. This was a handout that we had at one of our open houses recently. It was up on a board that everybody could see, and I made copies of it for you to have just so that you could see it. It's a really good representation of then and now. You can obviously see the population, that's the entire town. You're going to see an SCA or a TOG next to the numbers. SCA is the Santan character area. TOG is obviously town of Gilbert. But you can start to see, as we were talking about, 72.6 square miles. Santan character area is 16.1. Of the 72.6 in Gilbert, 68% is the 68 square miles is incorporated. There's still some that's not incorporated. But over time, you can start to see the changes in the Santan character area between the vacant land and the agricultural land. One of the things I thought that mirrored the 20% pretty well was there's 989 center line street miles in Gilbert, and there's 222 miles in the Santan character area. It kind of goes back to that 20% we were talking about. Santan character area is about 20% of the town. This was an interesting one, and this is going to come up on a future slide. 605 acres of developed public parks in the town out of the Parks Master Plan. In 1998, when the Santan character area went into place, there were 0 acres of public parks in the Santan character area that were developed. Since then, there's been 35 acres developed, and those are the soccer fields that are just south of Germain. As I mentioned, and as you know, we're working through the public process on the Santan character area update. We had a first open house on April 16th. Prior to that, we sent out about 10,000 postcards. We used Dana's group and did a lot of the social media where we posted tweets. We did Facebook. We set up a web page. We had about 50 people show up at that first meeting. Excuse me. On May 14th, we had our second open house. Used a lot of the sign-in sheet information. Again, we hit the social media, sent emails to those that we had, and we had about 20 people show up. I asked Linda in 1998 when we did this, what sort of participation did we have, just trying to gauge, and she said there was good participation from the folks that lived in the area, and a lot of the people tended to start with the process and then stick with it all the way through. So, the Planning Commission did receive an update as to where we were at on June 4th. So we're making progress through through our plan. These are some pictures from the open house, and I wanted to show you one of the gentlemen that we hear a lot from. Greg Ostapuck was there, so he's front and center. We've kept him in our loop as we do this. You can see zoning attorney Brendan Ray right there, and there's Kurt's backside. He was there as well. So, but we had a good group that was there. We took a lot of the comments and we made these word clouds. So the bigger you see the words on the cloud is the more comments we got on those. You got to remember too, this was shortly after the council dealt with Vestar and the 55 acres and also had the discussion on BMX. So Parks was on a lot of people's mind. That rang very, very loudly at the meetings. There's one up here under Liv that says, "Thank you, Town Council, for keeping the 55 acres." So there's a lot of things were very fresh in people's mind when we went through the two open houses. We've got our web page. I mentioned it, so we're continually updating it. This is an older screenshot when I put this together. That's why you still see the June 4th meeting, but. We updated with information, and we're still pulling information out of folks and keeping folks updated as we move through the process. So where are we at right now? We're about in this area. We just went to the Planning Commission early part of June with an update. We're sort of in this research and analysis, kind of the end of that. We're having some ongoing discussions about some issues out there that we really want to dig into and address. Depending upon the course of action we take for those, it may end up pushing some of these public hearings out because we want to do it right, and we might want to take a little additional time. But this was the timeline as we started.
We're going to talk about how we're going to start to implement the plan. So today, briefly, I'm going to go through how the FY15 organization and department goals align and go through the implementation action plan. I'll refer to it as IAP from now on so that Patrick sees that I'm making an effort to shorten the name. And then I'm going to be asking council to provide input and direction on the draft IAP. The IAP contains action items, steps, and timelines you'll see for successful implementation. So now, underneath your nameplate, you'll find the draft plan. It was in Dropbox, but now you can follow along with it. And after today, hopefully we'll take the draft name off of it and start working to get all those things delivered. Okay, so as you're aware, our organizational strategic goals, we have four of those primary goals that Parks and Recreation will be working on. And what the point here is that you can find these on page 4 and 5 of the IAP. These are the overarching goals. So we actually were able to take advantage of knowing about these ahead of time when we were finalizing the master plan. And you'll see that all of these items are contained within the IAP. In other words, everything's talking to each other. The long-range infrastructure master plans is included in our IAP, what we're doing this year for that. The rate and fee study, these are driven by other departments, and these are primarily Parks and Recreation function off that. So what it looks like on this, under community livability, we're doing, this is contained within your IAP. The phase 1 implementation is the plan. Optimization strategy is contained within this. Under the financial plan, we have rates and fees is also included, and along with long-range infrastructure planning. Okay, so everything is contained within this, and we're all talking to each other. The main focus areas, there are 7 items that we're going to go through, and I've talked with the mayor, so I'm going to take a little liberty here and stop after park development because I'm sure there will be a number of questions. And then if we have time, we can go through the rest of these items. There was over 200 recommendations, as you know, in the master plan, and so the Parks Board And staff got together a very collaborative, long process. Councilmember Taylor was part of those discussions and observed this. And basically we came up with 7 items that were approved by the Parks Board to move forward for your consideration, direction, implementation. These take advantage, I want to make sure we make this point, of current initiatives. In other words, things that we're already working on that were part of the master plan, we captured those. The council's organizational goals that we talked about before that we're working on, and other items that were identified as a high priority. And they also touch every single chapter within the master plan. So it's a broad approach. One more thing, extensive work plans have been developed. And so Mayor, what you were talking about earlier about everybody knowing their role, every single member of our Parks Department has a role in implementing this IAP. It's already been identified. Okay, so I'm sorry, I was on the wrong slide. Okay, now we're going to talk about park development. The page 6 of your IAP shows the steps that would be necessary to begin the process for a new park. And because building a new park is such a substantial multi-year effort, if you look on page 7, you'll see that we've went ahead and planned out the entire park project for our South Park in Gilbert. You'll note that it's a 4.5-year project to completion. And the reason why it's that way is because what we did was we aligned it with a bond election effort in FY16, in 2016. And now if it's council's desire to move that up, then we would have to have a discussion about a bonding effort in 2015, which means a couple things. One, it's a non-election year, so it would be costly. And also, we would significantly have to change a number of the work plans that you might be seeing today because we'd have to start today. Okay, so that's a discussion we can have if necessary. So let's talk about the plan for the park. The Parks Board and staff have gone through this very extensively and believe that the item that you're looking at is really the best for Gilbert, for the future of Gilbert. And so it is exploring options for developing Chandler Heights Basin as a district park through a development agreement or an agreement with the Flood Control District of Maricopa County. And if it's not available, an alternate site at the 80 acres at the southwest corner of Greenfield and Chandler Heights Basin. Now, 1B we already own, and so we would be talking about acquiring 1A. If you were to combine 1B and 1A, we would have a park that's 309 acres, which we do not have. Our largest park is slightly over 100 acres right now. If that wasn't an option, then we could develop the 80 acres down here, along with a number of other smaller sites throughout the town. The reason why we are recommending this, and let me just say this too, both these sites right here are currently designated as parkland in the master plan. One advantage, and I want to go through the thinking of why this is important to the community and to Parks and Recreation and the vision. If this will always be a flood control property, and it will remain that, and I doubt very seriously that the county would ever have plans to develop it. And so this could become quite an amenity for Gilbert and repurpose it rather than a flood control district property. If we were to develop this and this, we would still have this big, long area that's really not usable at the moment within the middle of our community. The benefits of a larger park, and this is what excites the Parks and Recreation Department, is that you could have a number of smaller parks that equal 309 acres, or you could have one large park. But Having a 309-acre park would add value and diversity of activities to our current system. In other words, we could do things that we can't currently do now, and it would be better than just duplicating what we already have. We would not have to duplicate resources such as restrooms, parking lots, lakes, more efficiency of maintenance crews. The park rangers would only have one site to monitor rather than a number of sites. There's also an opportunity for regional activities that we don't have now versus local only, resulting in positive economic impacts. And even rotation of fields so we can have better quality fields could be achievable. And imagine being able to have a 5K event right in one property. That's something that is very unique to the Valley and would be very unique to Gilbert. So part of the implementation action items for this item is to basically do a phase 1 environmental review, property survey, and this year we could do a preparation for a conceptual plan, do the preparation work for the RFP so it could be issued right at the beginning of next fiscal year. And the only thing that really the Parks Board and my recommendation would be to perform this year, and it's not in the current budget, field needs assessment. And what a field needs assessment, and I've had a lot of experience with this, will allow us to be able to identify the number of fields, the type of fields, the location for the fields, and even the exact measurements of the fields, all the way to build out of Gilbert to 330,000 people and beyond. And what this does is it tells us exactly the type of fields we need and what we need them for, and how we should build them, where we should put them. And so that's something that is being highly recommended during this phase. The more exciting things. We've got playgrounds. Right now we are in a process of renovating and repairing a number of playgrounds in a current CIP, 7 to be exact. And this falls nicely into our infrastructure master plan. And so the long-range infrastructure planning effort, I should say. And so basically, what we're doing in the area of playgrounds is meeting a master plan goal as well as expanding that. So this is rated as our #1 mission critical item, and you'll hear little bit more about this on Saturday for the LRIP. Basically, right now we are underway with data collection. We're going to be exploring product options with different vendors and select a menu, if you will, and then we're going to go out and meet with the neighbors to be able to have them be involved with that process. And then we'll go ahead and get those 7 playgrounds done, along with a preventative maintenance program for an extensive preventative maintenance program for the playgrounds in our system. Service analysis. This item shows our proposed effort to be able to evaluate all of our services that we currently offer today. This isn't to do with future programming so much as it is what are we doing today. And so it basically takes our existing programs and puts them into categories, which is core, secondary support, and specialty. And so we'll be bringing this back as part of the fee study that we'll be doing, the rate and fee study. And we've already created an internal team to start this process, and we're starting right now to classify and rate our programs. We'll be looking at a number of different things like what's the current cost recovery, do the market analysis to see if we're charging the right amounts, those sorts of things. And also we'll coordinate any fee changes right away with the rate and fee study. Any questions on that one?
So will we be receiving information about what our cost recovery percentages are, and will that come to the council for our input and direction?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
More importantly, as important as that, I should say, we'll be also looking at our programs and putting them in those categories. So you'll get to see what we think are core services, and we'll have that dialogue. Okay. Trails. Trails is exciting because we know that passive use of trails and any other passive use is the best economy that we can get because it's a high return on investment. Self-directed activities, we want to try, people like those, and so we want to try to maximize those. So what this one is an item to design a standardized path and trail sign system. The implementation of this will be in year 2. So this year what we'll be doing is public outreach, some research, doing a peer review of other agencies, meeting with user groups to see what's on their mind, what makes sense for them, and then identifying potential funding source, and we'll create it as a budget item for next year to implement it. One, I expect a lot of enthusiasm for. Basically what we're going to do is optimize and enhance our business strategies for Freestone Rec Center, Repairing and Preserve, and the aquatics. We're doing that this year. And so we'll be looking at all ways that we can increase revenue, attendance levels, and cost recovery for these particular service areas, as well as identify efficiencies and decrease cost per participant. We're working with budget and going through the lean principle exercise for those areas. We're going to enhance our business strategies. This will be the key element that our new parks manager will be working on. So we'll be looking at, hopefully the outcome will be 1, 3, and 5-year forecast, including metrics that we can measure, and also, and we'll start the implementation strategy. In the Parks Master Plan, there's it basically says, consider a comprehensive inventory of parks, facilities, and infrastructure within them. So that fits nicely into our LRIP effort. Really excited about this. You're going to hear a lot about this on Saturday, so I'm going to be very brief right now. But basically, we have identified our top critical areas for this year, and we're going through the process. You can look on page 13. We've already completed a number of items towards this goal. And all of our staff, all of our field personnel are out there right now. Well, not right now, but they will be every work day, gathering the data for the criteria that we've identified. And they are very excited about gathering all this data. And that includes, by the way, facilities. As you know, facilities now is in Parks and Recreation. So Howard's group is also collecting data on. This represents thousands of pieces of things that they're touching and getting data on. And, but as importantly, update, and there's 2 items on this, is to update and fully implement the maintenance guidelines in the current Parks Handbook. That's out of the language of the master plan. And so addressing the maintenance guidelines in the Parks Handbook, we're doing this year, we're updating it. And we'll also create a budget and submit it during the FY16 process. Any questions on that one? Okay, so in closing, the only budgetary item out of this whole plan that's outside of the current budget is the field needs analysis. And so any other funding should be covered in the current year budget. And part of next year's budget, part of this too. And as you know, this has been almost a 3-year effort to get to right here today. A lot of people need to be thanked for that effort. And I can tell you that the members of the board and the Parks and Recreation team and facilities, they're all excited to get going on this implementation plan. So thank you very much.
Of the presentation takes a bit of a turn off of the constructed development and those developers that just came in, and takes a look at fiscal 14 and the goals and the forecasted goals that we had set before this group. And I have at this point in time Kelly Patton come up, talk to you briefly about fiscal 14. When she's finished, I will talk about fiscal 15, and then we'll carry that over into a discussion about redevelopment.
Mayor, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to present today. As Diana mentioned, I will be giving you an overview of business development activities specific to fiscal year 14. So some of those goals that we outlined for ourselves as part of a 5-year strategic plan. Business development entailing business attraction, business retention, and business expansion of local Gilbert companies. Again, we just wrapped up year 2 of a 5-year strategic plan. Every year consistently we have these goals that are outlined for us. So measuring the number of jobs, the number of investment, the number of commercial footage that is either built or constructed or absorbed in the community. You heard our developers talk a lot about capital investment, a lot about job creation, a lot about what they're building. These are the information, the type of information that we track on the projects that we specifically work with. So you can see the column on the left was the forecast of what we were aiming for. The results are the column on the right. Lead generation, just to put some clarification to some of this. So lead generation are all those inquiries that we get from any of our targeted audiences. So the national and local commercial brokerage community, the development community, the site selection, international, national site selection community, as well as the inquiries that generally come in, the inquiries that you receive, that you pass off to us, the mayor's ambassador group that is out there. So this captures, the lead generation works to capture all of that activity. What happens then is those turns to prospects. So the lead generation may be high-level interest on demographics, high-level interest on real estate, et cetera. When they become a project or a prospect is when they identify some of these criteria. What is your capital investment that you're looking to do? What is the exact square footage that you're looking to move into or to build? What is the number of jobs that you're looking to create or to expand in the community? That's when we can transfer that into that prospect or that project area. Capital investment, again, all those things that those developers were talking about, land, infrastructure, cost to build, cost to do the TI, all the equipment that goes in, whether you're an office or a manufacturing, that's all captured under that capital investment number. Again, real estate constructed or absorbed, the announced jobs, so the jobs that those are being created, and then we also track the average wage of those jobs. So considering a high wage job as part of our STEM strategy, moving forward and looking to identify employment that are on the high wage job. Obviously a high wage job is an individual that can then go out and spend more within the community, which leads to a larger indirect impact. Some of the highlights of that activity, so we responded to 66 RFPs. 50 of those RFPs came from the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, who I'll refer to probably at some point as GPEC, or the Arizona Commerce Authority, the ACA. Greater Phoenix, as you probably are well aware, it's the Regional Economic Development Group. So they're looking to bring employment opportunities to anywhere in the region. They don't care if it lands in Gilbert, Surprise, Scottsdale, Buckeye, wherever. Obviously, we're interested in bringing it to Gilbert. The Arizona Commerce Authority, they're interested in locating and expanding jobs within the state. Again, Phoenix being one of the largest focuses for them. But those are two partners that you'll hear me talk about consistently throughout all this, and probably through Dan's presentation as well. The direct solicitations, 16 are direct solicitations from us going out and shaking the bushes. So that's activity that we have from, and we'll talk a little bit about this and this, activity that we have from some of those that travel, those sales missions, those conferences that we go to, that we work to really target our key audiences, being those, again, those commercial brokers, those site selectors, those developers, et cetera. So the goal of the 5-year plan, too, is that eventually we want this number to be inverse. So I mentioned 50 leads or 50 RFP responses, I'm sorry, came from these two top, the state and the regional group. 16 came from us. After the 5-year plan is done, we want those 50 to be coming from us and those 16 coming from our partners. We want to see our our RFPs being higher than what the state or what GPEC can offer us. Very lofty goal. We executed a Chicago calling campaign. So Chicago is one of our top markets for activity, lead generation, companies that are looking to either expand out of the Chicago market relocate altogether, or just expand and access the Southwest market, particularly California, as one of the largest consumer markets. We have a lot of firms that are interested in Arizona being able to access California for 40% less operational costs and landing their plant or their facility in California. So that Chicago calling campaign ended up with 85 leads and 10 active projects. So they called over 900 companies. So that gives you about a 10% return rate on lead generation and prospect activity, which is typically an industry standard for economic development. Partners and sales missions. So again, the sales missions, we executed 9 sales missions this year. Texas, Chicago, as well as California, San Francisco and San Diego, LA area. Again, those markets are identified, Chicago and California, particularly because that is where the most of the companies are coming out of in terms of wanting to either relocate or to expand. Texas is one because there's a huge site selection community in Texas, particularly in Dallas. So a lot of those commercial brokers that do national and international projects, a lot of those site selection consultants are concentrated in the Dallas market. So we spent quite a bit of time in there as well. Other things, Canada-Arizona Business Council. So the Canada-Arizona Business Council, or the CABC, everything's got to have an acronym, right? We can never just, not do it. So Canada-Arizona Business Council, so that is a group of business leaders based in Arizona, and then a group of business leaders that are based in Canada and all over the Canadian market. And basically, they are interested, Canadians are looking to place foreign direct investment in Arizona. We're looking to export, to bring in that foreign direct investment or those dollars into Arizona, and particularly in Gilbert, and then also export. So working with our local Gilbert companies to export back to Canada, or Arizona companies in this regard, exporting back to Canada. We are the first municipality to join the CABC, and it's very strategic to us as we work over the next year to build an international strategy. So as we work to bring in national investment and work to that national market, expanding that into the international market. And Canada, as for all the reasons that I'm sure you're aware, checks a big box for us. The Mayor's Ambassador Forum, you're all aware of those. We executed 2 this year, our 7th and 8th. You might start to see a pattern here with international, connecting Gilbert globally, again, concentrating on foreign direct investment coming into Gilbert, so those dollars that are being generated internationally coming into Gilbert, and then obviously, again, working with our local Gilbert companies on how we can work to export so they can build their pipeline and build their business. We also did a Mayor's Ambassador Forum on entrepreneurship. So as part of our attraction, retention, and expansion, how are we going to continue to grow not just existing businesses, but those entrepreneurs that are out there with phenomenal ideas? How are we going to continue to evolve that ecosystem and hopefully get them to grow and to expand, and then obviously to create more jobs and put more capital investment in the community? Broker outreach, as I mentioned, our brokerage community is one of our largest markets nationally, but also locally. So we met with approximately 55 different brokers over the course of the past year, and that's either one-on-one conversations, it's us going in and presenting at sales missions as to why Gilbert might make sense, talking about all the development going on, all the employment opportunities, sharing with them workforce statistics, demographic statistics, some of the land parcels that we're working to promote. So that's a huge group for us, targeted market for us to be reaching out to. We also worked on a branding campaign with the brokers that are representing listings in Gilbert. So the commercial developments, the office buildings, et cetera, that these brokers are listing and trying to promote, we co-brand with the Gilbert logo and our website. So showing that unity between the brokerage community, between Gilbert, and our ability to be able to get projects up and running sooner rather than later. Showing that synergy is huge and mitigates risk for a lot of these companies that are looking to locate within the community. Accelerated development sites, we identified 13 large land, commercially viable land sites within the community. Researching infrastructure, researching land ownership, researching zoning, researching all of those things that a company needs to know when they're looking to do a build-to-suit opportunity within Gilbert. Basically taking everything that these guys would do anyway and packaging it up, doing all the pre-work so they don't have to, packaging it all up in a bow and handing it to them. Again, risk mitigation. So they have a better sense of going, okay, Gilbert wants this type of use on this site, And here's the infrastructure that's already there. Here's the infrastructure I know I need to budget to put in, as well as the zoning and the categories that are involved in that. So 13 sites were completed this year. We have 9 additional sites that we want to complete as part of fiscal year 15 goals. Business retention and expansion represents 20% of our pipeline activity. Obviously, we want to see Gilbert-based businesses continue to grow and to expand. Partners in progress. Thanks to Kathy and her team. A very collaborative partnership that we have with her group to go out and do business surveys within the community. We think we know what businesses want to accomplish, their strengths, weaknesses, challenges of operating in Arizona and Phoenix and in Gilbert, but let's go out and hear it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So what we think they may need may not be the challenge that they're really facing. And it's really different from industry to industry. That Partners in Progress at the local level with Gilbert and the partnership with the Chamber leads up into the market intelligence. Market intelligence is a program that we work on, again, with GPEC, the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. So as we are out working with our chamber to identify the needs of local Gilbert businesses, my counterpart in Chandler, my counterpart in Scottsdale, my counterpart in Surprise are out doing the same thing. Under the GPEC umbrella, we bring all that data back and look at industry trends. So for example, 2 big industries that we focused on this past year with GPEC was aerospace and aviation, as well as information communication technology. So all those software development firms, those social networking groups, all of those types of video conferencing, all of those types of organizations that are marrying communication with IT and software. Huge opportunity for us in Gilbert, especially with the workforce that we have available to us. Size Up LBI, Local Business Intelligence. You probably all received an email. If you have not gone to play with this tool, it is phenomenal. It's for any type of business, large, small, whatever. Going to provide probably more of a resource for small businesses realistically. We actually have a couple screenshots, I think. So basically, a company that's an ice cream shop that's looking to consider downtown Gilbert, the Heritage District. They can go onto this site. It's a free tool, accessible through our website. They can identify workforce. They can identify where their competitors are. They can identify where their supply chains are. They can identify marketing opportunities. So again, if you have not gone onto this site, I would highly recommend it. It's cool just to play with. So, and I think that's it for me, unless anybody has any questions. In front of you too, there is your annual report. So that piece goes, makes a deep dive into just some of the high level information that I provided for you here.
The lines of service that we have, business retention and expansion, business attraction, all under the guise of business development proper. As we look forward into fiscal 15, we very quickly say, we're 2 years into the 5-year strategic plan, and where are we? So with some of the information that Kelly conveyed through our business development activities, we begin to take a look at fiscal year 13, fiscal year 14, sort of side by side with announced jobs and capital investment, and then very quickly compare those two with fiscal 13 and 14 in terms of the jobs. So you begin to see sort of where we are as we forecast goals. We are ahead of goal, and with the support of the executive team and its ability to support what we're doing in economic development, and then ultimately transferring up to mayor and council a budget that is an aggressive economic development team. You're seeing the results of that effort. And to Kelly's point, where we started in all of this and where we ultimately want to go is to change the landscape of how activity comes into the town. Sort of actively waiting for phone calls, I don't think that that's going to do it. Going out with an aggressive business development strategy with tactics into California, into Canada, into Illinois, into Texas is the way that we're bringing business development into the community. Hello. Drop the mic. So fiscal 15, where our forecast is going to be, lead generation continues to increase, as does capital investment and announced jobs. So you can expect more to come throughout the year. We'll be communicating with you quarterly with our activities on the business development front, and certainly on the campaign side, all of those marketing activities with all the various partners that we're doing those marketing activities with. we'll be updating you as well as the executive team with those activities, with those efforts, with those results, and with those campaigns. So as we shift from sort of a true business development perspective into more organizational goals, the following slides are going to showcase where economic development will be spending its time. And so if we start with the end in mind and we start looking at build out, the 5-year strategic plan was really designed to get us onto the map. And so these organizational goals are goals that we've committed to not only the community and to you, but also to the executive team. Tourism, for example. We're going to draft and complete a tourism needs assessment by the end of Q1 of this fiscal year. A business retention and expansion strategy. You've seen a lot on the business development side. You haven't seen as much on the business retention and expansion side. What we're doing in that area is putting together a 3-year strategic plan so it merges nicely with the 5-year strategic plan. And you're going to see a draft and completed retention and expansion plan for the next 3 years at the end of the October timeframe. We then look at a higher education implementation strategy. That's something that we think that with St. Xavier coming into town, with the 64 colleges and universities within a 30-minute commute to Gilbert, we think understanding Gilbert's role in higher ed is very important. So the immediate action in this area is to draft a scope of work to analyze the current market demand for higher education, not just in Gilbert, but in the Southeast Valley, in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and certainly in the state, because that's how higher education reaches out into the community. It's not just within the municipal borders of Gilbert. And then we'll be folding into a redevelopment plan. You'll hear a little bit more about that from Scott, but I think what's important to note is that redevelopment plan will be completed by the end of May. We're then going to take all of those strategic planning efforts and all of those plans, and we're going to put them together into a market research and job policy. Last quarter, we were working down this path of developing a job strategy and to make recommendations on those job strategies. What we found is that rather than solve for a one-on-one business, if Google, for example, were to come into town, what would we do or not do for Gilbert? Or Google rather, we thought where we would take this is put this strategic planning, begin to solve for build out ultimately, use these strategic plannings along with long-range infrastructure, along with the financial plans, et cetera, of Gilbert, and put all of that into a comprehensive body, and then and only then come back with what we feel is jobs policy designed to attract, retain, and develop the community. And so the idea is we're solving not so much for an economic development job-based strategy. We're really trying to solve for, at build-out, are we a sustainable community? And so by the end of this fiscal year, you'll be seeing more on the market research and all the research analysis part coming together into more of a policy recommendation side. Developer presentations. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Scott Powell. Scott's going to give you an area overview of the Heritage District and the Heritage District planning. And when he's done, I'll briefly touch on the Northwest Corridor.
It became a redevelopment area back in 1991. It's about 0.3 square miles. So when we talk 72.2 square miles, this is the 0.2 of it. It's a, and it's governed by the Redevelopment Commission. So we've been really fortunate to have some great council liaisons. Jen was, before I got there, did an amazing job, and I'm very fortunate to get to work with Ben for the remainder of his council term. I know it's a passion area for him, so it's exciting to work with you on, Ben. So thank you for all your support. 5-member board, it develops a little bit differently. We're trying to encourage development or density, pedestrian-friendly approach, so you'll see 0 lot lines. You have build to lines, not setbacks, so you're going to the sidewalk. There's a shared parking model, so you don't have to put all your parking on site. Ground floors are open, so you can kind of see what's going on, and all that contributes to a kind of a sense of place and an interesting place to be. Oops, wrong way. All right, now that we're out of reverse, most people think of, when you think of the redevelopment area, tend to think of what we call between the railroad tracks and the canal, which is kind of where the businesses is, but it includes a much larger, about 200-300 acres, including some of the oldest housing stock in the area. And with the recent addition of the 11 acres up north, we have development opportunities bookending within the district to greet people, let people know they're coming into a very special place that is Gilbert. So what yellow represents here is all the town-owned properties. This has been a very concerted effort by the town stemming back from when a redevelopment area was created. You can see there was a lot of parcel assemblage, which is, in the development side, a very difficult and timely thing to do. The town being, again, very proactive with a vision committing to keep this area as a vibrant downtown area, has gone through and acquired these properties as they become available to keep the momentum going and to keep redevelopment happening within the area. So as we know, we've seen a lot of new and exciting things come in with within the Heritage District. A lot of those, again, takes a step back. Whether you think of the Mahogany Run building where Joe Ryan Postino is, Oregano's Hale Theater, even the Heritage Court where Matt Salmon chose to put his congressional office, were all development agreements the town did to encourage development within the Heritage District. And what we're seeing now with Heritage Marketplace and some other stuff that will be coming out shortly, how we can continue to keep that momentum going. So just completed this year, thanks to Ken's team in CIP. I've added some, nothing that people think are too exciting, garbage cans, bike racks, benches, tree grates, but again, it creates that sense of place. It's, again, the town coming in and reinvesting into the area. And I keep talking about—
Just a second, let's hear it for Ken Pin Ken.
Yay!
Okay, continue, thanks.
All right. Oh, okay. And also some beacon crossings and then the signal at Vaughan. We want to encourage people to park, get out, and enjoy, walk around and enjoy downtown, or ride their bike, not having to get in their car, drive down, get out, and enjoy each of the different types of businesses. So parking, if you haven't gotten a phone call on parking in the downtown, you probably will in the next few years. Parking garage is coming online in in October. Next are 364 spaces. But in a downtown area, again, with trying to increase that density with a shared parking model, that pushes parking a little further back, which means people have to get out and walk, which is why all these pedestrian improvements are so important. If you don't have a parking problem in your downtown, then you've got a development problem in your downtown. So when people raise that issue, that's a good thing, because that means people want to come down here and experience everything that Gilbert has to offer. So St. Xavier University, we'll skip through this slide pretty quick. Probably the most important thing, and I think it gets overlooked quite a bit, is I don't think there's anybody in this room that hasn't touched or will touch this project at some point in time. And especially on a retreat like this for planning, I think it's important to recognize that something like this is a holistic family team effort. So everybody here, thank you for all your efforts on this. Yeah. On the downtown redevelopment side of it, we've seen snooze breaking ground. They're supposed to be done by the beginning or the end of this year, beginning of next. Zinberger Lolo should be open in November. You've got Pomo Pizzeria and Barrio Queen late January, early February. And Kelly wasn't just waxing poetically about an ice cream shop. There is a company from Chicago that is going to open their second Arizona location, and it'll be in the Heritage District. They haven't announced it formally. The lease is signed, but it's their news to share, not mine. So I will stand down and let them do it. Going across the street over to the eastern side, if we remember the old Beaven site and Tees and More, those two sites have been sold, and one announcement will be coming out next week, and another one is already starting the process. So we're going to see some major development on the east side coming through the private sector here shortly, hoping to be open probably towards the end of 2015. So a lot of great things happening, and again, a lot of really good momentum coming on. To keep that momentum going, we need to take a look back at the Heritage District redevelopment plan. It was last updated in 2008. These things need to be updated at least once every 10 years. A lot's happened since 2008 in the downtown. So we're going to kind of focus on the 5 areas. With land use, touched on parking. With the land that we control, it's time to return it back to the development community. We've been very successful as a community for the past 15 plus years of selecting sites, putting out to RFP, and seeing great things happen. So we just want to make sure that we don't wind up with a problem where there's not enough development or there's not enough parking, so those two can support each other. Housing is important. It helps breathe life. It supports the restaurants, and it creates a demand for retail. Retail demand is very, very local. More people living down there, the more people that are shopping at retail shops. Traffic and circulation, throwing it back to Ken again, figuring out ways. We're just going to move his office over in our shop. your car, that you know where you're going and you can enjoy that so you don't have to keep finding a parking space. And then parking optimization as well. The current uses, we see AUP as an administrative use permit is how it's currently allocated. It's worked great so far, but again, we're already starting to see the limits of that solution, giving some of the challenges we have right now. It's a great problem to have. It beats the alternative of what are we gonna do here? So reviewing some of the other stuff, I think we've got a great vision, we've got great design lines, but it always helps to look at that and make sure it fits in with this and make sure we're not missing anything as well. Very, very quick timeline, you know, assuming unless there's some feedback here, we'll move forward with kind of the scope we outlined, start engaging a consultant. We're gonna need a lot of stakeholder outreach, a very engaged member, you know. Thankfully, we have the Morning with the Merchants that Ben's been leading. Will be a great mechanism to help get feedback, but we do want to include others in and around the area as well.
Cleverly known as Northwest 1, it is the first employment corridor as we begin to map out those employment corridors. It is, with an overlay to your right, shows the legend with general uses and general plan uses that are able to go into and otherwise occupy the area. I think it's important to note as you begin to look at Northwest 1 in this corridor that this area here, sort of the Cocopelli area, residential area, and this area down here, the islands, those areas are very much impacted by this area. And really, as we begin to look at this area, one thing comes to mind immediately, and that is it's mostly built out. It has one of the best real estate attributes to it: location, location, location. It is a gateway property into the community. It's just off of the 60. While development will likely not have freeway frontage onto the 60, it's extremely accessible right off of a full diamond interchange. And as we begin to look at this area in this corridor, you notice that from Arizona Avenue essentially over to McQueen, and then finally over to Cooper, you've got 3 full diamond interchange that provide accessibility and traffic circulation in this area. So in the other redevelopment corridor, we talk about traffic constraints. This area has amazing traffic circulation, the ability to get in and get out. It is an area that is dense with jobs. It is an area that has freeway accessibility and has the appropriate employment zoning in place. As I said, it is the highest employment density in the community, with roughly 15,000 jobs in that corridor. So this corridor right here is home to about 15,000 jobs. In comparison to our community central business district, that central business district along the 202 has about 12,000. So this area has been a rich and vibrant area for jobs and concentrations of development for 25 plus years. As we begin to look at the area, it is also defined by development that is 25 plus years of age. It's defined by infrastructure that's 25 years plus of age. So we're working with Ken and his group to make sure that we are looking at the flow and the capacity in that area. As we begin to look at the challenges in this corridor, it was developed 25 plus years ago with different standards, different roof heights, different property appearances and curb appeals that lack a character area designation. Yesterday, we heard about the Santan character area. This Northwest corridor does not really have that character area. It is not defined by corporate campus amenities like you would find in the Research Park or in the Research Triangle in North Carolina. And one thing that we're noticing is all 3 developments that were here today were not located in this area. We're seeing new investment in the form of tenant improvements and tenant improvement only, but not really build to suit opportunities. So as we discuss challenges, we move to the opportunities. And I think that developing a corridor vision with the end in mind to attract that investment is paramount. Aligning our infrastructure with 10-pin Ken, that is hard to say, 10-pin Ken, align our infrastructure with the community vision and goals behind STEM, behind science and technology. And what we're doing by bringing this to you today is really trying to respond to those early indicators and seek direction from you. And we think that that direction can help us with that continuous improvement that will encourage growth and help this area not only maintain the 15,000 jobs in the area, but who knows, someday it could at build out with the proper attention and time associated and resources put to it, have 30,000 people at build out. So your direction today, which is on this direction on whether or not we want to call this area a redevelopment area and begin to apply the statutory requirements of a redevelopment area, your direction today will trigger team assembly. It will trigger an intra-department team of multiple Gilbert departments, consultants, and others to help us reach out to stakeholders, validate the goals and the visions, really engage the stakeholders, the property owners, particularly the owners that own that commercial, industrial, and office development, and then ultimately bring that level of engagement back to all of you so that we can brief leadership and seek your input, and then ultimately create timelines, what you saw Scott doing with one of his last slides there in the redevelopment area known as the Heritage District. And so with that, Mayor and Council, staff is looking for you, or from you, direction on whether we should proceed, not proceed with applying a redevelopment status to this corridor.
I manage the water resources and also the energy portfolio of the town of Gilbert. And so quickly, just really for review and kind of an update on where we are, several years ago, Gilbert did apply for and get 1 megawatt of power from the Parker Davis hydropower plants. We do have an agreement with SRP to essentially move that power from the dams to our service area. They give us a rate. They get some benefit, we get some benefit. They recently adjusted that rate, and we were saving about $250,000 a year. Came down to around $225,000. And so as we look to renew that contract, we're going to look at opportunities with APS. The power has to be used with water, wastewater infrastructure. But there is some opportunity to, again, see if we can't get a slightly better deal. Gilbert did apply for some Hoover hydropower as well. It's the post-2017 allocation, so there are multiple chances for Gilbert to see if we can get some allocation here. But we did crunch all the numbers, and we qualified to apply for 3 megawatts. Similar cost structure, that'd be a substantial savings to the citizens of Gilbert. And so we're pursuing that with everything we have, and I'll continue to update you there. I should say, if there's any questions, I'm really going to try and keep it high level. If there's questions, please ask. If you want more information one-on-one, is an excellent way to get deeper into some of these details. Water resources, we're going to kind of go over maybe a Water 201. You've had the 101 before, so we'll get a little refresher there. That was on purpose, actually. So we'll go over that. We'll look at what the portfolio looks like, break it up into the surface water, groundwater, reclaimed water. There's been a lot of discussion on shortages on the Colorado River, so we'll talk a little bit about that, how it might impact Gilbert, what we're doing to plan for, and then update and next steps. So again, high level, 1980, Gilbert, part of the state of Arizona, state passed a legislation that managed all the groundwater in the state. And Arizona was the first state to really go this far to actively protect this resource. And we're seeing issues in a number of other states. Currently, you can look at California, but there are a number of other states where their aquifers are seeing serious depletion and a lot of problems, whereas Arizona has been actively managing that for now 34 years and counting. And there's continued updates. This is the Phoenix AMA. Gilbert's down here. So we're regulated by the rules that govern the Phoenix AMA active management area. Municipalities in Arizona have to have an assured water supply, which says that they have 100 years of water for every dwelling unit that exists in their boundaries. And so as we build new homes, every new home we build, we have to prove that we have 100 years of water supply for that home. So if we're doing 200 homes a month, our water supply needs to be that big every single month. And so water purchases aren't typically in that small detail. And so we'll get a big slug of water. That'll last us, and we can grow into that, and we'll continue to move forward. We'll talk a little bit more about the balance of surface water, reclaimed groundwater a little later. Part of the AMA is that we're required to have a conservation program. We're allowed to tailor that program to fit what our needs are. And we'll talk again a little bit more about what we need to have happen from a conservation standpoint as we get through the rest of the presentation. So getting into the water supply itself, again, high-level refresher. Here's the Colorado River coming through Utah. CAP Canal takes us across. Oh, I don't see the my canal line is not showing up on this slide. Regardless, the CAP Canal comes through all the way down through Phoenix, down into Tucson, carries all of the Colorado River water that Arizona has a right to through the central part of the state. As we get into the Phoenix area, here's the CAP Canal coming through. Gilbert's in the central area here. And then you have the SRP system, the Verde River, the Salt River. They connect here, which is, there's a place where you can switch the different types of water to the other canals. RWCD Canal, and so this is our north treatment plant, south treatment plant. We had to go all the way through Queen Creek to get that Colorado River water into that south plant. Surface water, the supplies that we have, SRP water has to be used on SRP land. There are some very minor exceptions to that, but for the 98% of all SRP water has to be used on project. RWCD, all RWCD water has to be used on their lands as well. CAP water can be used across all three of them, but mostly we take water from here and here. RWCD gives us about 1/6 of the amount of water that SRP does. So just to give you an idea, sometimes we have to supplement SRP water in this area with CAP water. That volume is, the demand is a lot greater in the RWCD section, and so we really do have a high demand for water in these two areas. Just kind of an FYI, from a water standpoint, 45% of Gilbert is in RWCD, and so when we're talking about water supply and where that water comes from to supply that, almost half of Gilbert gets water from RWCD, but again, it's not enough, so we have to augment that. Groundwater, Gilbert is really lucky in the way that we developed. We were heavily reliant on groundwater, which caused us to build a lot of wells. As we grew in and we joined the programs for the Phoenix AMA, we couldn't pump groundwater anymore. We had to become reliant on renewable supplies, not just pumping the aquifer. And so because of that, we had to develop surface water supplies, but the capacity is still there. And as we move into drier than normal conditions, drought-like conditions, we have the capacity to pump water, whereas some other communities that don't have the well field that we do are in a different position, where we have the capacity to pump up a considerable amount of water. An acre foot, let me back up just an inch here. An acre foot of water is about 325,000 gallons. It's a foot of water across a full acre. If we didn't use terms like this, we'd be in the billions of gallons, and it just would be useless numbers. And so water in high volumes, we talk in acre feet. The annual demand of Gilbert's right around 50,000 acre feet annually right now, just to give you an idea. And so our build-out pump capacity is planned to be higher than our current demand, lower than the total demand, but that's, as there are severe shortages, we temper demand to meet our ability to provide that water source. Reclaimed water, we can use it anywhere. It's ours. Once we treat it, we can put it wherever we want to. Again, looking at build-out, the Neely plant, the Greenfield Water Reclamation Plant are going to be producing almost 28,000 acre feet of water. That's almost a third of our build-out portfolio of water. That's through, we'll recharge that water and we'll pump it up through our pumps. We'll get credits for that water and pump it up in different areas. So our need to have recharge capacity at the riparian, at the Neely recharge facility, at the South recharge facility, looking at other ASR wells, which is a type of well that allows you to recharge water and then pump it back out. These are all things that we're going to need to work towards and are in our current plans to make sure that we have the capacity to use all of this water. Water resource portfolio, 2011 through build out. The bar is where our demand was in 11 and projected to be. You know, here's the total supply. SRP is here, RWCD, CAP. This is groundwater that we're allowed to pump in reclaimed. And so reclaimed grows as we move out, but as you can see, there's some step ladders here too where we've added some new colors. Those are things that we're working on and that we need to add to our portfolio to make sure that we can meet these build-out projections and the growth projections. Said another way, but at the end of the day, with our plan, we just work to accomplish that, and we will have enough water at build-out based on our current trajectory. We've heard a lot about shortages on the Colorado River. Lake Mead is losing more water every year than goes into it through evaporation and uses. And as that happens, there's less water available in Lake Mead, and that's where the Central Arizona Project takes all of its water. They take about 1.5 million acre feet, so MAF is million acre feet. So they 1.5 million acre feet off through Lake Mead. If Lake Mead drops below a certain elevation, there's cuts. Gilbert's water priorities are here. And so as cuts happen, excess water falls away. The agriculture pool sees a reduction in the amount of water that they have. So this is phase one of a shortage. So it's projected that possibly in 2016, there might be a phase one shortage declared on the Colorado River for the southern states. That means that the ag pool will be cut and that we'll have 100% of our supply. None of our supply will be cut. Now, does that mean we should use all of our supply? There's shortages, you know, so we're working to plan for more serious things down the road, and we have been doing things and we will continue to do things. But as a point of perspective, as we get to a level 3 shortage hits about here, this is non-Indian agriculture priority water, and some of this goes away. But again, even as we get to tier 3, which is the most serious tier that's been defined, we still don't see any reductions in our municipal and industrial priority, which is what M&I stands for. I apologize for the acronyms. We're planning for these shortages. We're ready to meet them. They're serious. We want to support CAP as they deal with real problems on the Colorado River. Gilbert, in the next 2 decades, will not have a problem with CAP water. Even beyond that, it's too far out to really project exactly what's going to happen. You know, one good snowpack year pushes off these dates 4, 5, 6 years. And so anything can happen. We can continue having dry periods. We're in about year 18 of drier than normal conditions on the Colorado River. We've had 0 cuts. We're looking at maybe in year 2021 having the first level of cuts. That's a 21-year drought that's the first time we're seeing cuts. Arizona knows how to handle their water resource for the most part. The Groundwater Management Act, you know, really helps set up that, requiring the cities and towns to have a 100-year supply. Those are things that are all prepping to handle these long, extended dry periods. It should also be noted that the agriculture pool of water, they have rights to pump groundwater. And so as this supply goes away, it won't necessarily hit our agriculture production in the state of Arizona. They have a right to pump groundwater, and most of them have Hoover power allocations so they can pump cheap groundwater. Looking at this, trying to figure out a way to describe this, we went kind of back to our budget mindset that might be a little more familiar. And so we'll talk about base water adjustments and one-time water adjustments. And so as we looked at that bar chart, the top of that bar needed to grow as we move towards build-out. The things that we're working on are settlements with the White Mountain Apache tribe. with an increase of 1,100 acre feet. We are working on the San Carlos Apache Tribe lease that we have signed, but it requires Secretary of the Interior approval, and we have not gotten that. And we're continuing to work closely with the Bureau of Reclamation, with internal and external groups to work on how we can resolve that, because that's a lot of water. And we need it for build out. We don't need it tomorrow, we don't need it next year, we don't need it 5 years from now, but we need it. And so we're working towards that. Gilbert did apply for some of the non-Indian agriculture water. This was the last bucket of water that was available for Arizona to distribute off the Colorado River right. And Gilbert did receive an allocation of 1,800 acre feet. And so that was something that wasn't in our 2012 Water Resource Master Plan, but it's really a big win. This is a perpetual supply. There's not a 100-year lease on this. This is once we pay the cost for that portion of the CAP canal, we get there.
Hawken, let me just interrupt. And I think Hawken's being a little modest. That allocation was competitive, and Hawken put it all together and made the arguments, and that's how we got that additional allocation. It wasn't an entitlement that we just said, give it to us. It was a competitive process. So.
Thank you, Mark.
I like that, Rod. Let's do that together. 1, 2, 3. 10 pin Hawken. Very good.
All right. That's over. Now what's next, Hawken?
That's what I'm working on, the Hoover power, but that's no promises, but that's what we're working on. Getting to the one-time adjustments, Gilbert has for lack of a better term, a checkbook of the right to pump 350,000 acre feet of water. So again, to put that into perspective, Gilbert's current demand, annual demand, is 50,000 acre feet with no cuts, everybody using just as much water as they want. 7 full years is underground stored for that. And so again, as we have small shortages on the river, we have prepared for that. We have the right to get to this amount of water, and that's full demand. We would never use that full demand. So again, the 7 full years is really more like 20 years of small pieces of this if never gets replenished. And we are constantly working with the Fort McDowell's, with the San Carlos on annual purchases to increase this number as we continue to work towards these base adjustments to our water portfolio supply. We are also working with the Fort McDowell's to try and get a base supply, but we're still working on that. Again, totals here, so we're looking at total add to base of almost 8,900 acre feet. In the last 2 years, we added 3,500 acre feet to that checking account, if you will. And we're planning on reducing that amount as we move forward, but continuing to see opportunities for adding to our portfolio supply. So, questions. Without an increase to base, if we don't see any of this in the next 5 years, we will begin to have a small imbalance of our water portfolio supply. What does that mean? That means we use some of our checking account until we get there. A small imbalance, we're talking 100 acre foot, 200, but it grows every year. But there will be an imbalance if we're unable to get those additional supplies. With the base adjustments, we're looking at around 2025 being that point of imbalance. The master plan that Corolla did for us in 2012 talks about if we can get these numbers, this 8860, and we can save 4,000 acre feet through conservation, and we can redirect some green space demand to other people, then these numbers work. Then our build-out numbers work like we showed you on that bar chart earlier. What does this 4,000 acre feet through conservation look like? If a home's using 15,000 gallons a month, they're to 14,175. That's not requiring people to reduce it. This is helping them use water efficiently. It's about 70% of water in Arizona is used outdoors, and most people overwater their landscape by 2 to 3 times. This number is here, 8% current, 5.5 of build-out demand. These are doable numbers, but it requires effort. It requires some programs to incentivize people. We currently are working with the conservation team. WIG was working with HOAs, getting an HOA program up and running. It was running very well. We had some reductions in staffing, not positions, but people moving on to other places, and took time to fill those. Once we filled them, we restarted that program up, and in 3 months, we got to an annual savings of 150 million gallons a year. And so this is doable, but it requires effort. It does require some funds. We're going to need to be tough to do this, but the cost of acquiring these new supplies is very high. And as we look at saving this water to purchasing new supplies, saving the water is, we're looking at 15, 21, 25 to 1 cost differences there. With all of this portfolio, it does include about 4,500 acre-feet of water above what a normal development would use. And what does that mean? Your average industrial users assume to use so much water. This is above and beyond those assumptions when we look at the general plan. And so there is water available for STEM development, and we work with economic development closely when they have projects, and we say, yes, do we have that water? Yes. We look at capacity. We work with Ken's group, with Jessica, 10-pin Ken. And we help the team understand the implications of that, and then how much water do we have, and how many jobs is that going to create, what's the balance there, and we just add that information to that discussion. Updates, that's generally in a nutshell the portfolio and what's happening. You've probably heard about Navajo Generating Station. That's the big coal plant that's outside of Lake Powell. The federal organization, what's the EPA? I'm counting that one up to no sleep. Yes, the EPA has recently announced that they are probably going to accept an agreement that allows the NGS to shut down one of their 3 coal-fired generators to avoid having to make changes for 10 years. And what does that mean? It means less power is created, it means less power is sold, and the cost of our CAP water will go up because of that, because CAP owns a portion of that plant, and when the plant reduction goes down, CAP's costs go up. They pass those on to us, and so we're going to see our CAP water supplies costs rise before this and then because of this. And then after 2029, we'll have another go-around of, now do we put on the $1 billion of improvements to make the other 2 plants viable with the new rules, or do we move on to different situations? So we're closely watching this. We're also closely watching the CAP and making sure that they're looking at other alternatives. We don't want to come out in 2028 and have them say, we don't know what to do. We're really pushing them to make sure they have other plans on the table. ADWR is working on the next management plan. They have, every 10 years, they're required to come up with a new management plan for the AMAs. There will be a new aquifer management requirements. We're working closely with them on that. Also conservation requirements. We're working to update the drought plan as well. We want to bring that back to council in the coming months. It was passed in 2003. So it's time for an update. There are some things in there that we're working to adjust just to get more, if people are in line with some set of standards, we might not have required cuts to those standards. It might not make sense if someone has made a lot of cuts to then require additional cuts. So we're working on some language there. We'll bring that back to council. And then we're taking on some enhanced roles. Water resource, water conservation are going to work a lot more closely with some other divisions and departments than we have before. And what that means is we'll be able to work with water, with wastewater, with the riparian group, with streets, with Parks and Rec, to really find ways where we can save water, where we can be more efficient and really serve as a role as our expertise. We can come in and help other groups be as effective with their water supply and again, stretch that supply as far as we can. And with that, and I've got, Julie gave me one more, so.
Week we had 2 meetings with ADOT regarding the passenger rail. Originally, we were thinking that we would have the meeting and we would update you on the meeting that happened Thursday about the project, but in between, we had a meeting with the Phoenix Mesa Gateway folks and their concerns about how that project, how the passenger rail will interact with the airport. Right now, there are, as you know, three primary routes that have made it through the various evaluations that are going on. In Friday's meeting, we found out from ADOT that the green has got so many obstacles, although it will remain in the system, it really is not a viable option. So we're down to the yellow and the orange route. The airport, sitting over here, is a little concerned about, and they have a new airport manager who is very assertive and protective of her airport. She feels that the passenger rail could be an asset to help it as a partner in the airport. We don't disagree, but we are concerned about some of the options that she brought forward and how they might impact the town. In Thursday's meeting, ADOT said that they are just about ready to finish up their findings and present currently the public process and the technical process indicates that the yellow is far and away the preferred alternative and will most likely, excuse me, unless something happens between now and December or January, will come out as the recommended alternative for the project study. It will then go through a formal public commenting period. ADOT will wrap up in around January or February and present their findings on into to the federal agencies that are involved. A couple of caveats that they brought out. There may be some issues up here in Tempe with some 4F issues going through some historical or economically disadvantaged areas that they'll need to take in. And then down here in the Gila River community, there are some cultural issues. They will be presenting some possible alternatives for further study that will be carrying on, but the basic alternative will be the yellow alignment as they go. Any questions?
The plan, we've actually developed 2 different build-out transit plans. One is more of a what would be required in a minimum level of transit investment for build-out, and then another enhanced one. The recommendations for all the recommendations up here are in both elements. Things I want to just touch base on: high priority bus routes that we'll be looking at over the next few years, adding to Gilbert is one along Baseline Road. It's both Gilbert and Mesa. This is the location that we received the most number of requests for as far as a new bus route or extending. There's a current bus route on Baseline Road that stops at Dobson. It would be essentially extending it east. You know, we have to work with Mesa on that, whether that stops at Gilbert Road initially or we take it all the way to Power Road and Superstition Springs. But the Baseline Road corridor is pretty much built out. There's quite a bit of land use there that is higher in transit usage. The other bus route we're looking at is on McQueen Road, adding service through Gilbert. Currently, Mesa has a bus route on Mesa Drive that stops at Baseline. In the summer or fall of 2015, the light rail will be extended out to Mesa Drive and Main Street in Mesa, which essentially makes it a lot more competitive for Gilbert residents to use light rail if they so choose. This McQueen Road transit route would be able to tie into that new stop in 2015. A couple other important recommendations. I think as we talk about commuter rail, whether that's regional commuter rail or whether that's intercity commuter rail, we have 2 stations that are planned in Gilbert, one in the Heritage District and one in Cooley Station. I think it's important for us to identify, we've identified those locations, but we also need to identify park and ride space for that. That, you know, I think in a MAG study for the regional commuter rail, the Cooley Station stop was the highest ridership. People still get to transit driving cars. And so we need to be able to provide some sort of park and ride site, and whether that's shared use with you know, a shared parking plan or a traditional park and ride site, that's something we can work out. We've also identified the Williamsfield corridor as a high capacity transit corridor. Much like Arizona Avenue has bus rapid transit on it now, and they're looking at light rail. We've identified the Williamsfield corridor through Gilbert as a connection from downtown Chandler to the airport and to the ASU Polytech. All of this transit is the one that Gilbert has the least control over ourselves. We have to work with our partners because transit routes go through multiple municipalities. We'll be working closely, and we have been working closely with Chandler, Mesa, and Valley Metro. Moving on to the bicycle element, and the bicycle element and the pedestrian element have very similar recommendations. From the bicycle element, out of the plan, we really want to prioritize missing segments of bike lanes along existing arterials, and this really comes up in the northwest part of Gilbert. We've done a good job over the past 10 years in our standard details for any new arterial or collector road. We have bike lanes on them, but there are sections of Gilbert Road, sections of Val Vista Drive, sections of Warner Road that don't have them. Looking at ways to be able to get bike lanes there or on those Scallop Street sections. Also, we'll be working with the Parks Department to prioritize missing segments of multi-use paths. I know a big topic has been the Western Canal and UPRR crossing. I think it's very important as we look at the bottom bullet here to prioritize getting bicycles in and out of the Heritage District that we can get across the railroad tracks safely and legally, and being able to bring other modes of transportation into the Heritage District besides vehicles, because our vehicular access, especially from the south and from the west, is very limited because of the railroad. And then just looking at other at-grade railroad crossings, whether that be on the trail system or with our sidewalks and bike lanes, the railroad cuts across the town at a funny angle, and so we want to make sure that we have safe crossings where we can cross bicycles as perpendicular to the railroad tracks as possible, because so they don't get stuck in the tracks or have that opportunity. The pedestrian element, really very similar, to prioritize missing sidewalk segments of our sidewalk system along roadways. We have a few locations identified near the Heritage District or in the Heritage District that we'll be working on over the next year. Also coordination with the Parks Master Plan. And then also we have quite a few trail crossings that cross arterials that are unsignalized today, and we need to prioritize from a safety standpoint, volume standpoint, how to build either some sort of signal or beacon at those locations to make them safer and make our trail system more usable for all users. On the intelligent transportation element, or ITS, currently we have 180 traffic signals in the town of Gilbert. We'll have 181 in a couple weeks. We've seen a rapid growth in the past 10 years, number of traffic signals. We're doing a great job now. Over the past 5 years, we're communicating to our traffic signals and being able to change them on a real-time basis when needed. So our recommendations for this section are to continue to upgrade our communications. That upgrade usually means going to a fiber optic network. Currently, we have about half our signals on Gilbert's fiber optic network, and half our signals are communicating via radios. The radios do great, except during storm events, when typically we need to work with, on our traffic signals sometimes. So also another recommendation is our goal is to have a CCTV camera at every arterial to arterial intersection and major entry point into Gilbert, so that we don't record our traffic streams, but so we can view them in real time when needed. Also to be able to provide more coverage opportunity at the Traffic Operations Center. And that really the technology is getting there. We've been working with Mark's team over the past few years to be able to communicate from our laptops at home so that we can have that 24-hour coverage when needed. And also we have a project in the CIP to explore adaptive signal control around the mall where traffic flows really fluctuate and we can't predict them on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, having a new sort of technology to control the traffic signal timing. So as I talked about, the plan has also developed a prioritization of projects, a way to score projects. We know dollars are going to be tight, whether they come locally, regionally, or federally. And so these are the categories we'll be looking at each of our projects with. As far as next steps, this month and next month, we're going to be making final revisions to the Transportation Master Plan. And then in September, our plan is to bring the final Transportation Master Plan to Council for adoption. And then using fiscal year 2015 to really identify projects for reprioritization in the CIP.
When we talk about the long-term financial plan, we've been talking about this over the last couple of years, and we've been building components of that and bringing it back to you over that course of that time. So what I would like for you to do is think back over the retreat so far, and then as we go through the stuff today, and see how it all ties together. Because when we are looking at a long-term financial plan, we're looking at the operations and the local government services. We're looking at capital, which is huge. And we're looking at everything that it takes to support that. So when we started on Friday with the defining the community needs and looking at some of those things, when we looked yesterday at economic development and helping to shape the future, all of those things are really at play when we look at the long-term financial plan. So one of the things that you're going to hear from us today is that we want to make sure that we're thinking about this from all sides. It's the data, the detail is very important, but so is the vision, so is the strategy, so is the community identity and everything that we're trying to accomplish by that. And ultimately, this comes down to providing services for our citizens and building that public trust. You've seen this before. We want to bring this back because these are the components of that financial plan, and you've seen this, and we'll see this again later on. Much of this we've started walking through over the course of the last year. We're going to bring you back a little more detail about this today. We're going to visit some areas that maybe we haven't really talked much about just yet. And then ultimately, over the next few weeks, you're actually going to be seeing that final document that breaks each of these components out. So first and foremost, today, we're going to start off by talking about capital considerations. And you're going to hear from Greg and from Ken and from Rod about some of what we have going on the capital side, both in terms of the CIP and our traditional model of growth and expansion, but also in terms of how we start to maintain that now that we're looking more towards build out. And that's a very different model, and we need to start addressing that. The beauty of that is, by your direction, we started doing that over the course of the last couple of years. Gabe has been working with, has been helping to lead the efforts on the long-range infrastructure plan, and he's going to be talking to you about where we are with that so far today, and then turning that over to Greg to discuss how we're moving forward in the future. So when we look at that long-term financial plan, that capital consideration is huge. I mean, it's a large dollar amount. It's really building and shaping the community, and it's one of the most visual things that you're going to see here for the town. So we want to make sure that we're addressing that. Not just in terms of what the needs are today, but making sure that the decisions that we make today are in line with the Gilbert that we want to see for tomorrow. So we've talked a lot over the last couple of years about this in general, but it really comes down to two different things. We need to plan for what it is we need to do, what it needs to look like, look at that gap and make sure that we understand what those needs are, and then we have to look at how do we fund it. One of our biggest challenges, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, is that the revenues that we use to build the infrastructure in the first place, especially as it relates to growth, are not the same revenues that we can use to be able to rebuild it once it comes time to do so, or to maintain it, or to do those rehab and reconstruction projects. So the revenues that we have for capital are either going to be on the operating side, which would be going back to either taxes or rates to be able to cash fund those types of projects, or looking at different types of debt. Even when we look at debt, though, it comes down to some type of operating revenues to pay that debt service. So a couple of issues that we really want to address today as we start to roll this out. We're really ahead of the game in many ways, and we've had an opportunity over the last few weeks talking with the rating agencies to really dive into just how ahead of the game we are, or how on top of the game, I guess, we are here at Gilbert. Because we're not waiting until things are broken to figure out, well, shoot, now what do we do now? We're looking at, we know that things are beginning to age. We know that we need to take the steps to maintain it. We know that we're going to have to rebuild some of these items or replace some of these items. What are we going to do to make sure that we're positioned well to do that? And we do that in a couple of different ways. We can minimize some of those costs by making sure that we maintain our infrastructure to begin with, and that we identify what it takes to take those steps to take care of what we have. And in so doing, we can extend the life of it. And you heard, even with the fire trucks yesterday, some of the things that we're doing to make sure that we extend the useful life of the resources that we have. So we've heard a lot of times, well, it's not broken. If it's not broken, don't fix it. We want to make sure, though, that we are keeping on top of those things that will extend that useful life, that we're maintaining them. Streets, we can look at we look at our crack seals, our fog seals, our slurry seals, all of the different types of seals and maintenance that help to extend that useful life so that we don't have to reconstruct that street as quickly. And we have other ways of dealing with that as well. And Greg's going to be talking about the long-range infrastructure plan and some of the key aspects of maintenance, and you'll hear that from Ken as well. And then we want to talk about process optimization, because there are things that we can do in our planning processes that are going to help us get the very best value out of whether it's capital, whether it's operating. And so today we're going to have an opportunity over the course of the day to talk to you about ways of going about that. On the capital side, this is where you might find some of the largest financial benefit to that, because we're talking really big dollar items, millions of dollars that it takes to build things like streets or water treatment plants, water and wastewater lines. And so if we are looking at this and optimizing our processes, we can make sure that we are keeping those costs to a minimum. So what that gets down to then is making sure that we have the right information from which to make decisions, that we have the right processes to go through, and that, again, coming back to the vision and what we're looking for the direction of the council is that vision. What does it look like from the very beginning so that we have the processes in place and the data to support it? This is really fun. This is really exciting stuff that we're doing right now. And we don't often get an opportunity to talk about that. But many of you have been in this community for a very long time, and you've seen some of the changes that have occurred. And with such rapid change, sometimes it's difficult to keep up with that. But with your leadership and with this tremendous team that we have, we are doing some really, really cool things. We're looking at everything that we do, and we're finding ways that we can continue to do it better. And when we do that, we start asking again, okay, how do we do this even better? How do we make this work even better? And the more you do that, the more you see those opportunities, the more you see those results. So you're gonna hear a little bit from Amber later on about some of the process improvement opportunities that we have, the tools that we have to put that together, and some of the great efforts that you're gonna see from the staff from throughout the town in making that happen. Some of those tools, you'll hear some terms or vernacular thrown around. We wanted to kind of cut to the chase and get down to the meaning of what that is. So we're gonna start off by looking at how things are done right now. What is the current process? And what are all the important aspects of that we need? So rather than looking at that and saying, well, we're doing a SIPOC diagram, what does that mean? Well, it means that we are looking at who the suppliers are of the information and the resources. What are those inputs that we need to be able to make things happen? What is the process that we currently employ, looking at what we do today to get to what desired output? And then never losing sight of who the customer is. And the customer is not always obvious, and it's not always singular. So making sure that we are keeping in mind who all of the customers are for the results of those processes. So we do this looking at the very beginning, what the current state is, and then we do a value stream mapping, and we identify waste. So if you map out what your processes are, and you start and look and you think, wow, this gets over here to so-and-so, and it has to sit there and wait for a certain period of time. Or the customer now has to take this piece of paper and walk it over to here. You start to identify where maybe there are some waste. And in some cases, you're able to actually minimize that waste. It starts off by figuring out what that was and defining that. Well, the most important thing here is to know not only who the customers, the stakeholders, and the key players are, but what our roles are. Because if we're all running in different directions trying to make things better, but we're not talking out in the field, we're going to run into each other. We're not going to be...
That is a Cardinals farm team, is that? That's just red hats. Okay, continue, sorry.
The best farm team in the majors.
Patrick had actually said he'd gotten that from a Giants game. I don't know. But we want to make sure that our efforts are complementary, that we're working together, and that everyone understands. And when you go back to the value process mapping, it's really interesting when you get everybody in a room and you have everybody start putting on sticky what the process is. And even people who work together every day find themselves going, I didn't realize that's what you did with that. Or that's really cool. I didn't even know you were doing that. Hey, you know, we do this, and perhaps that can help over here. And so you're going to see a lot of really, really neat results when people start to understand what the roles are of all the different parties. The other thing, and you see the acronym there of RACI, and again, most of these things really are acronyms, and when you break it down, it adds a lot of meaning. That means not only defining what the different tasks are and who's involved in them, but who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted on that, and then who needs to be informed. So talking about those types of things and what types of contributions each player is making as well. You don't have to absorb all of this. It's just a picture of one of the tools that we use to make sure that we're hitting all of those key points. This is called an A3, another fun term that they like to throw out there. But we look at why the change is needed and look at that current state. So where you see the red column there, that's really looking at the planning process of it. So what is it you're trying to accomplish? Why is this so important? What is the current state of being? And then what does your ideal future state look like? So just by simply laying that out and taking the time to think through that, it helps to organize where we're at so far. We do a gap analysis then and identify where we're missing or where we can see some improvement, and we start to hypothesize. And that's actually, it's as simple as that. You know, you might start the conversation with, wouldn't it be cool if? I think Marnie Green had us do that as an executive team last year. Wouldn't it be cool if? What does that look like? And then you start well, if I did this, then I think we'll get over here. And you start those hypotheses. Then you start experimenting. What are the types of incremental changes you can make to see if you're actually getting those results that you think you might get from those changes? As you get to the action plan, this is where you lay out so that everybody's on the same page, going back to the roles of the individuals, the tasks that need to be done, and what the expectations are for each, and what dates perhaps you're expecting those types of deliverables. And you meet back again to follow up and bring that all together. And you start to measure your results. It's amazing when you measure results, how exciting that can be, because you start to see those changes that maybe you thought you never would see. Maybe you've been making a lot of efforts for an awful lot of time and making some incremental changes in that direction, but there's a lot of competing interests in many times. So when you start to formalize and organize those efforts, you can get some great results. And then you go to your lessons learned, because there are always lessons learned. I think one of the most important things that we had to learn as we started taking on these types of efforts is that there are failures, and that's okay. We don't want them, but they happen. And a lot of times if you go in thinking, well, I'm going to put these tools into place, and then everything's going to work out great, and it doesn't, you're deflated, and you walk away thinking, all right, well, that was a huge waste of time, and we didn't get where we needed to go. So it's important to know that as you go through these, you're going to have some failures or maybe not be as successful as you thought you would be, but you get back to those lessons learned, and then you say, okay, well, and you kind of start all over again. What are those incremental changes that we need to do? So we can start that implementation all over again and continue to improve. So we wanted to start this because one of the first projects that we're taking on as a collaborative team amongst the town is the capital improvement process. And so Greg's going to talk to you a little bit about the capital improvement program right now, but those tools that you saw up there, we've already begun looking at that as a team. What are the roles and responsibilities from across the town? Who are the key players? Making sure that the departments and all of the owners for the different projects are involved in those types of conversations, so that we know that the projects that we're bringing to council for approval really are meeting the needs that were defined to begin with, and that we're doing it in the most efficient, effective, and cost-effective way. Greg?
As Dawn said, this is a brief update as to where we stand in terms of our capital improvement program update. Right now, we have about 48 projects that are in the pipeline in various stages going through. One of the things that I think sometimes people don't understand about, particularly capital projects of this nature, is that their life cycle is 2 to 3 years. Well, can be as much as 2 years. Generally, nothing less than a year and a half. So when we start a project today, we're not finishing it for 2 cycles into our financial program. We have 48 projects going on. We have about $121 million worth of value in those various projects. The CIP group within the engineering services, we have 4 full-time project managers. We have another young engineer who has been working in that, but I'm retasking him over to help out in some general engineering services, which is really taking some burden off from me. If you look at and you do some simple math, you see that each of the project managers is running 10 plus projects, about $30 million each. Looking at some of the industry standards, through a professional organization, have become friends with the assistant city engineer in the city of Mesa. They have their project managers, they have about $380 million worth of work. They have 20 project managers running that. Their value per is down around 18 million. So we're a little over, I understand that it's the town's philosophy. We like to be lean, but we are stretched a little thin in some of these areas. What are some of the current projects that we're working on? These are some of the, in terms of project delivery, what we're trying to do is we're trying to become more client focused, so that we look at each of the operating divisions or any other organization or part of the organization who request services from us as our client. We're trying to take more of a private practice type attitude, where they are our client. We need to give them what they need, when they need it, for as much as they said they wanted to pay. Some of our clients are obviously parks, streets, water. They're the ones who we are looking to help establish priorities within their projects, within the group of projects that they may give us, and when they need them delivered. Sometimes water can only have a project that has to be done within a certain period of time because of a dry up. Parks has got some issues in terms of working with some of the schools, or when they can take some of their facilities off from service. We look at what are some of the delivery methods. The traditional in the town has been design, bid, build. It is a very effective way. It is a very traditional way. The industry, however, is moving towards what they call the CMAR, Construction Manager at Risk. The traditional design, bid, build sets up an inherent adversarial relationship between the owner, designer, and the contractor. We had, as a case in point, we had a hard bid on a project. The bidder left probably about 1/3 of the value. We call it leaving it on the table. His was that much lower than the next group. So you wonder what he left out, and how much are we going to have to work to ensure that he doesn't try to get it all back to us in terms of change orders and extras. Very challenging, makes the job fun some days. But doing a CMAR, we developed more of a working partnership with the contractor. They come in early. They help us in terms of value engineering out the project. Maybe there are ways that by process or design or materials we can reduce the overall costs with it. When we have a complex project like some of them that we have, this also lets our contractor engage the other stakeholders early on in the process. We're looking to start implementing that on a more regular basis here in the town. I mentioned the time frames. Usually nothing less, when I look at our project schedules, nothing less than a year and a half from the day we start to the day we're able to say we're finished. Sometimes it's 24 months or more. Some of the constraints can be land acquisition, permitting, utility relocations. There we run into the issue. We have a project going on right now. We can only do part of the utility relocations during the winter dry up with one of the irrigation companies. Some of the special projects that we have going on right now, we're working with the City of Mesa. They are the lead agency in the Phase 3 expansion of our Greenfield water reclamation plant. The program budget is about $160 million, about $10 per million gallons per day of capacity increase. Whoops, our share is $40 million on that particular one. And we are supposed to have this online in September of 18. It is next week. We have an interview process. We had 3 design consultants, design teams that submitted to the consortium, which include us, Queen Creek, and Mesa. We have the interviews for those. Excuse me. We'll probably be selecting the consultant shortly thereafter. This project, the delivery method is going to be a CMAR. That's the City of Mesa's preferred method. And as you can tell from my prior conversation, I'm sympathetic to that point of view. Santan Vista Water Treatment Plant. We're working with our partner, the City of Chandler, in terms of doing the Phase 2 expansion. We are the lead agency on that particular project. Program budget is about $62 million. Our share is right around half of that, or 31, 32. We need to bring that online to meet our partners' needs in January of 18. And then, of course, everyone is aware of the St. Xavier project. Program budget is a little over $40 million, while the town is front-ending some of that over the period of the program. The university is to reimburse us. We're supposed to be operational in August of 15. A couple of the road projects that we have going on. Eric yesterday talked about how much of our main work is on our roads are being completed. The bottom one, Germain Road, is one of the few that we have coming up in the reasonably near future. The Cooper and Guadalupe intersection, we're in the process of finaling up the design, acquiring the last piece of property. And this is one where coordinating with our utility stakeholders is important, because if we don't get this done this year, we basically push this project back one whole year as we go along. And then everyone who's ever driven up the road is well aware of the Gilbert and Guadalupe intersection improvements. As Eric mentioned, in many respects, in terms of improving our transportation infrastructure, doing the intersection improvements is going to be a great way of leveraging our money, because intersections tend to be the constraints. So that's a quick overview of the program. Are there any questions? As Dawn indicated earlier, this is exciting. This type of planning and programming, particularly when we're someone in my position. I've designed all the McDonald's that I care to. I've designed all the subdivisions that I care to. But getting in and working with community-wide infrastructure planning is, in fact, exciting. In our program today, we've got 4 basic parts. Gabe is going to talk about what took place before, bring us up to where we are. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it applies, what are we going to use, how are we going to make it work moving forward. Ken's going to talk a little bit about the operation and maintenance, the operations end of it, because that's the flip side of an effective long-range infrastructure plan. And then one of us will wrap it up. So Gabe?
So for the last 2 years, as I said last year, it's been a monumental planning task for us. It touched almost every corner of the organization, everyone in Public Works, Parks and Rec. We have Rob Giles behind you, who has been working on this diligently for 6 months. We have Hondo Judd, Chris Parasot, who we used to call the Gabe Whisperer, because I would say things that made no sense, and then she would correct me, and that was awesome. But we now have Rod and Greg and Ken, who bring a technical expertise to this program that I don't have. So when we talk about implementation now, I'm really excited to see how the 2 years, how they can kind of take it and push it down into the organization. So some of this is going to feel like deja vu. This is still true. This is the age of our infrastructure and when it was built, and you saw this slide last year. What Greg is going to show you is a bit later this is kind of an amalgamation of all of our infrastructure. He'll show you specific assets within that infrastructure, where they're trending, the critical elements, and where they age. So where this is true overall, it might not be true for certain assets, and Greg's going to talk about that. Now, before we go into my final 2 slides, so I applied the Lean Six principles down to my presentation, and I did 2 years in 2 slides, 1 year each slide. But before we get to the recommendations, we have a real quick quiz question, and it's a challenge between Patrick and the mayor. First one to buzz in. All right. Who was the last National League batter to bat over 400?
Bill Terry.
Oh my, that was amazing.
Oh, New York Giants.
Amazing. That was amazing.
New York Giants. It's a Giants question.
He batted .401, and that's a Hall of Fame batting average. And it's also amazing that you knew it that quickly. That's shocking. I feel like you're reaching now. That feels like a stretch. And the reason I bring that up is I'm confident as we move forward. We made a lot of recommendations last year, and right now we have a batting average that's higher than Bill Terry. And I think in 2020, when the implementation of this is done, we'll maintain a batting average over 400. So they retired his number in 1984, and I'm not suggesting you retire 004359. But if I should come back and find my name in the Ring of Honor, that's okay. Firing is not retirement. That's right. All right, so these are our findings, and again, some of this is deja vu. Assets are often replaced, not maintained. We're pushing this down into the organization, so we're starting to change that. We're designing maintenance programs that aren't based on when something explodes or blows up. It's very, very exciting. That feels like a round of applause. Our maintenance programs right now, they don't focus on condition. They're mostly age-based. So when something is old, we look to replace it. But there's a lot of other factors that go into that. The third point is new. Say the town has been operating in a subsidized environment. We're not paying our true cost. So when we don't maintain things properly, we have to replace them quicker, and it costs more money. And we feel that we haven't been paying our fair share. And fourth point is same service, more expensive. So the roads you're driving on now will be the roads you're driving on next year, but we can't use the one-time funds that we built them with to pay for them. And that's true across a whole category of assets. We'll have the same service, it'll be the same high quality, it's going to start to cost more to operate it. So when we go to the recommendations, like I said, we made a lot, but I'm just going to pull out kind of the 5 high-level ones. So we wanted a review of the replacement funds and update our policies. So for water last year, we transferred about $7 million into the replacement fund, and that was $1.6 million higher than our 10-year average. So that's a very good start, and we're far ahead of a lot of municipalities because we have a significant tens of millions of dollars for water and wastewater, which is great. Our drawdown right now in the end of the 2020s is still 2.8 million higher for water than what we're setting aside. But again, we're far ahead of the game, so we're doing okay. This isn't an unfunded liability, it's just funded to an end date right now. Wastewater, we put in 6.8 million, which was 1.1 million higher than our 10-year average. So again, that's great. And it's in a little bit of a better position where we only expect to draw down about 200,000 more than we're putting in by our average. Streets, we made our first transfer into streets since 2008 this year. It's $425,000, not for infrastructure, it's for fleet and rolling stock, but again, it's a really good start. We wanted to determine stormwater activity. We know that we have a ton of assets and infrastructure for stormwater that are built. We don't have the activity tracked or cataloged. We budgeted this year $120,000. We actually had a little under $250,000 in activity. And what this doesn't take into account is we have to start replacing all of our stormwater infrastructure at a certain point. And right now it's streets and water that are on the hook for that. Balanced spending trajectories, we talked about facilities last year, so I'm going to let Greg and Ken talk about asset management. Move regular and recurring maintenance to the operating budget. The example we use with that is sport courts. We know that every 3 years, for example, we have to refinish some of our courts. What we've been doing is saying we're doing this one time every 2 or 3 years. And that's not a one-time cost. It's recurring, so it needs to go into the operating budget. And then the last bullet point is we need to start now, and we need to have this in place by 2019, 2020. So when you see the specific dates, you'll see that Rod's pulling 20% of Parks and Rec through, so he's on track, and Ken is pulling 50% of specific items through, so he's also on track. So we've done a lot of hard work, but now really the real work begins in the transition, and I'm really excited to see what Greg takes and does with this.
So Thursday, I met with Susan Goodwin, who's our outside counsel. She provides a lot of legal advice to the engineering group, particularly our CIP. And we were talking about our relative times with the town. The fact that actually today is the beginning of my 3rd month with the town. And she commented that she'd been with the town for close to 30 years. And I responded back to her that it was interesting because about 30 years ago, in 1983, I believe it was, project teams working under my direction, I was the lead project manager, were doing the planning, platting, design, and construction of the Islands project, including the offsite sewer, the lift station, the force main, and everything. And I find it interesting that here it is 30 years later, I'm back in, now having an opportunity to look at and work with that infrastructure. Gabe mentioned, Susan noted that at that time there was about 6,500 people in the town. Again, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but I find this interesting. 6,500 people that were within the town. Now we have over 230, and in the next 15 to 20 years, we have maybe another 100,000, and that's assuming that we don't go vertical with all the redevelopment work that our economic development folks are talking about. So how did we get all that infrastructure? In the report that Gabe gave last year, there were about 11,000 hydrants in the town that we now own, we now have to take care of. There are almost 5 million, over 5 million, probably close to 7 million feet of water mains of various sizes throughout the system. There are almost 18,000 manholes, sewer manholes that we need to take care of. There are, I don't want to do the math in my head, but probably there are almost 900 miles, so however that makes into feet, of sewers that we have within our system that we need to take care of. We have almost 1,000 miles of road, and that's centerline miles. One of the things we need to think about when we're maintaining our infrastructure is that it is not centerline miles that count, it's lane miles. And if you think of how many of if you just double it, and that will take care of the local streets, some of our collectors, but our arterials and some of our larger collectors are multi-lane. We have 3 and 5 and 7 lane streets out there. Each lane needs to be maintained. So we have gone, as Gabe indicated, from a CIP-driven infrastructure. We are trying to stay ahead of who's coming into town. But now, as he indicated, And as I know from personal experience, because 30 years ago, there wasn't much in Gilbert, now there is a whole lot. We went from a CIP-driven infrastructure, which we still need to because we need to bring in 100,000 more people, so we can't walk away from expansion-related CIP, but now we need to start taking care of it. A lot of communities look at their infrastructure on a run to failure. The American Society of Civil Engineers does a periodic evaluation of America's infrastructure. In 2013, they gave America a D+. And when you look at the core stuff that we look at, streets, water, sewer, those were all D. There is an unfunded, across the United States, $3.6 trillion of investment that needs to be made by 2020. Now you kind of wonder what these other people are if a community like Gilbert, whose most of their infrastructure has been taken care of, and we don't have the huge replacement needs that we do. This is a picture of the, I'm sure that folks took a look at, or have heard, may have heard, this is the water main break that took place at the UCLA campus over in California. One of the things that came about as a result of this is that the Wooden basketball center, which just recently went over $130 million renovation, is underwater. At least the floors are. And the picture, one of the pictures in there was a facility individual going in and trying to suck up the water and save that new basketball court. So if we don't take care of our infrastructure, and I'm not suggesting that this is because they didn't take care of it. I don't know enough about it. But if we don't take care of our infrastructure, we eventually could find ourselves in more of these. One of the things in infrastructure planning that we need to take a look at, we need to do some risk assessments. Obviously, in the graphic on the right, the older something is, the more likely it is to fail. One of the things in infrastructure planning and maintenance is looking at the risk. If you've got something that is not likely to fail, and even if it did, the consequences aren't great, which obviously is not the case here, you can maybe put that off a while. The higher you move up, where even if it is not very likely to fail, but if it does fail, the consequences are serious, you need to take that particular piece of infrastructure and pay more attention to it in terms of your programming. So the purpose of the long-range infrastructure plan is to identify what we need to be able to take care of our customers now, the people that we have in the city or in the town now today, while we want to be able to add new customers as we go along. And so we need to keep a balance on that. Some of the things that need to be involved in a long-range infrastructure plan, which has been talked about before, we need to look at our operation and maintenance. Now is the time for the town to look at that and get engaged in it. We need to be able to start planning for things wear out. I drive my car, I'm in a no payment zone. I like it, it's really nice. It still works, it's right, but I know eventually my car is gonna run out and I'm gonna need to get a new one. Our roads, our sewers, our water lines, our manholes will all eventually fail, and we need to have money. It will be beneficial to the community as a whole if we have money set aside to be able to take care of it. We need to look at the long-term financial sustainability of the program. We need to realize that this is not a one-time. We don't do this once. This is like our general plan, our master plans. We need to be looking at this on a periodic update. Some of the things that we need to do, full inventory. All of our operating groups are in the process right now of finding out what they've got, where it is, how big it is. They're also looking at what is its condition. We need to do a condition assessment of every one of our components of it. And we need to compile O&M records because that's important too. The fact that we have a piece of an asset that is at a 90% today doesn't mean that in 5 years it's still going to be in 90%, or doesn't mean there aren't other issues that need to be taken care of. This is an overall program that talks about how an asset management system works. We look at what our needs are. Don talked about identifying our needs. Some of those are handled by way of our master plans, the various master plans that we have. Then we start defining where we're going to put our programs, where we're going to start putting money, whether it's in our capital budget or in our operations budget. Once we get those things in there, we need to take care of it. These are some of the things we talked about. I can't emphasize enough the importance of a computerized GIS-based tie-in to our asset management. This is an example of some of the information that we can get out. This happens to be of our water system. This talks about the types of materials. So we now know where all of in certain materials like ACP is something that in a water system we might want to take a look at removing. But we look at the next map and that's the same system but looked at by age of installation. Well, maybe some of these things that are ACP but are fairly new, we can defer those based off of some other factors. Long-range infrastructure plan depends upon an aggressive and proactive maintenance program. Now, the engineering services will probably be, from a day-to-day point of view, involved in the overall management of the long-range infrastructure program, are not going to be the ones that are going to go out there and do the maintenance. We're not going to file the reports, but we're going to take that data and we're going to use that to help us assist it. This happens to be for pavement management, but every asset that we have has a deterioration curve. Over life, over time, the ability of that asset to perform the way it is intended, which in pavement is called a condition index, usually from 1 to 100. In waterline, gravity lines, it's from 1 to 5, but the same basic concept. There are certain treatments that you can take, you can do at a certain stage in the life of the infrastructure. You make it, you extend out that life. Some of them you can repeat, some of them you can't. The longer you wait, the more expensive it will be, the less extension of life that you will get. Part of the long-range infrastructure plan is for us to start programming and planning for that. We can help reduce the cost of owning that if we make the right investments at the right time. So, and Ken's going to talk a little bit more about this in terms of regular preventative maintenance, and he's going to talk about predictive maintenance, which is even the next level up as we go. We need to document all the work so that when we look at the end of the year, we see where things are. We need to find out if there are hot spots that we need to start focusing on it. And again, I can't emphasize too much, and we have it in our Lucidity program, which is a GIS-based maintenance management system. So, some of the things that we look at is the criticality. We talked about the risk management, looking at it. What are some of the options available? Sometimes we have to put it off because the assets, we can't get to it right then. This happens to be of our force main failure out on Greenfield. This is an area that I'm not sure we could have. This is one of those where it just happens and we have to fix it. If we had a replacement program, we would be able to draw the money out of that to be able to pay for this. We want to look at them. We want to look at the assets relative to how long they're going to be. We want to look at industry standards, but industry standards just gives us a base. For example, industry standards says you should clean your sewers once every 5 years. But from past experience in my last community, sometimes every 5 years isn't often enough. Sometimes every 5 years is more than you need. And so you have to balance that, and that's one of the things that the operations people we were working on to determine what's best. The parks and facilities are also part of this. Their assets are part of our long-term infrastructure program. They're focusing now on preventative maintenance, corrective maintenance, and there's a huge difference between the two. In my last community, we had a very expensive piece of infrastructure. We couldn't get ahead of the prescribed maintenance. Got to the point where we were spending more time corrective. So we had, I guess in the modern storage, we would say, we did a surge and brought in outside help to help us bring the system back up so that we were better able to take care of it ourselves. And then they are going to be responsible for establishing their core priorities that we will then integrate into it. Some of the things they're going to do, they're going to be identifying their critical assets. They acknowledge that they've got a whole lot of stuff, so they're looking at certain components of it. For example, HVAC, a very important item in this building in the middle of summer. We certainly want to make sure that the AC system is working a lot more than, maybe we've got a few tears in the carpet. We could probably live with those a lot easier than a non-functioning AC unit. They're going to be looking within their industry for best practices, and then they're going to work within the program to develop their schedules. In the end, what we're going to do, what the group is going to do, the program will identify maintenance needs, capacity needs for both greenfield and brownfield development, and what we're going to need to do when things eventually fail out. We're going to identify projects, and we're going to figure out what resources, whether they're personnel, contractors, or money in order to be able to pay for it. And I think, at this point, Ken?
We talk a lot about those things that are unseen, but this building is a good example of infrastructure. Our parks are another good example. When you look at those of us that have had kids, we understand how quickly they deteriorate the things that we give them.
That's why he's one of the greatest contributors in the town.
This is being recorded, huh?
My uncle, who has 8 kids, says if you want nice things, don't have kids.
Tell them thanks. So in the parks and facilities areas, Greg spent a really good amount of time setting the stage for the processes that are essential. What I appreciate about the earlier part of Gabe's discussion, he really identified, what the focus of LRIP was and how this thing began and the value of it. And then he transitioned from phase 1 and the value of phase 1, and then the transition from phase 1 to phase 2. And so because a lot of the heavy lifting and a lot of the good work was accomplished then, and let me say this part, and this is the most critical part, you're really modifying and changing the culture. And that's the key that makes a difference. The value is in the paradigm of the culture, and that's getting us away from just fixing when it breaks down or fixing because, okay, we got to operate this valve because a contractor is going to connect over here and we got to shut the water down, and that being the only reason we do that. Or, the air conditioner's broke, so let's fix it because we don't want the council in here in a hot building. And so it's those types of things to more accurately, that works for us too. That's important. That's very important to us. But we want to do it in a manner where we more precisely, more accurately, more predictively evaluate those things. And as a result of that, here is a timeline with some of the components related to the parks and facilities. Now, we've identified the critical asset. They've identified various categories as well. We have in public works as well. And so the categories identified will be what will be used for the baseline information. And when you look at the criteria, you identify why is this important, why do we do it now, and you look at some of the parameters that will make up the value of this level of assessment, this level of scrutiny. And then based on that, utilizing that criteria, then you begin to gather the data. You begin to put the information together. You begin to categorize it in a manner to where you see what's really important, why it's important. I can give a description of that on the water side or the sewer side a lot more readily than you can in parks, but it does not make them less important. They are as equally as important. It's just that the criteria is somewhat different. On the water side, there are certain particular water mains that if we lose those mains, my day is going to be extremely difficult. That's just as simple as it is. I mean, on the sewer side, There are certain particular lift stations. If they're not working, then I'm not having a bad day. I mean, you're talking about moving stuff. Yeah, I'll leave that alone. So when we gather the data, the next phase is for us to analyze, to capture that with the level of service. There is a certain level of service that is expected of town property, of town assets. And in order to maintain that, it's very, very vital that we make sure that that's established by way of prioritization, by way of assessment, by way of O&M, by way of looking at the effective ways to replace, to repair. And most agencies just go immediately from putting it in, and they figure we don't have to look at it again until it breaks down. And so what we're doing is a little bit more comprehensive approach. And so these are some of the dates related to those practices. We're moving more toward, Greg mentioned, and I like the way he couched it, from the standpoint of not just saying industry standard, but it's a matter of the proper application of industry standard to Gilbert. Because most industry standard approaches will require a certain level, but if that requirement isn't consistent with the way the town has established our level of service, it has no value for us. And so we want to use those standards, bless you, we want to use those standards as a baseline for what we do and how we do it, but we want to capture them in a manner where they bring value to the way we operate, and they bring value to the way we are expected to maintain and operate our facilities. And these are some of the ways in which we plan to perform those things. And that's maintenance on a more frequent basis. It's identifying, looking at enhancements. Greg had one of his slides that showed there are certain areas in the life of an asset or a component that if you perform an enhancement, then you will extend the life. Mark often uses the analogy of buying a new car, and if you don't do anything but drive it. Is this being recorded? Because my wife thinks that you can just drive it. And we've been having some challenges that, yeah, okay. So when you, there's the camera, huh? So if you just operate something without considering the value and importance of maintaining, changing a belt, changing oil, spark plug, something, yeah, it's getting personal. Yeah, I better move on. So when these things are taking place, and not only that you're doing it, but there's a level of monitoring. It's one of the things we find that you can make enough main break repairs in a certain section of pipe to where you have more than paid for the replacement. And so it's a matter of identifying where that is. Or you can perform a certain number of repairs on a chiller or an air conditioning unit to where you have essentially paid for a new unit. And so what we want to do is to evaluate what these numbers are so that we can find that area that really makes it more appropriate in terms of the timing to make the replacements and or enhancements. Here are some other critical areas that we're looking at in public works, and these all feed into the long-range activity that we are embarking upon. When you look at the standardization of the way we operate, we talked about having procedures and processes in place. You gain a lot of efficiencies when everybody is doing the same thing the same way. And so that becomes important. When you look at evaluating what we currently do and identifying areas or levels of efficiencies that we may be able to gain. We've already begun this. In the water distribution area, Amber has assisted us in evaluating our processes, and I'm extremely excited even about the things we've done that have allowed us to gain some efficiencies. And we're going to look at that level of scrutiny in all of our lines of service, and that's going to give us a huge amount of value in terms of making us more efficient, making us more effective as an organization. And then we want to be more safety-centric. We want to make sure that safety is a huge part of the way we operate. My goal ultimately is I want my employees to go home in the same manner that they came to work. To me, that is vitally important. And so these are some of the things that help us to get there. You know, we talked about the timelines on the public works side in terms of the criteria and prioritizing those. We're doing that. Looking at the procedures, identifying the most critical procedures. Those are the ones that have a greater value or have a greater impact on our operations, and making sure we have those things in place. We talked about the application of industry standard. We really want to be looking more at where can we rehab, where can we enhance as opposed to full replacement, so that we can gain value, we can buy time, if you will, with some of our critical assets. And then our goal is to get about half of the maintenance portion installed in place and operational by the end of the year. And a lot of the information is in our Lucity system, our computerized management maintenance system. And so it's a matter of us looking at those things and tying a lot of that information together. This is a picture of the force main. That's me in the picture to the right. I purposely put this picture in there because I wanted you guys to understand that I am extremely concerned about looking like I'm busy when my people are doing the work. And so the purpose of this picture is that, and I hope that I've been effective at conveying at least part of that. That's the proof. Thank you. And so when you look at what we're trying to do, here are some of the anticipated results.
Hey Ken, was that a challenge that you want us to also look busy as well?
Eddie, what he's not telling you is that the hard hat, vest, and boots just came out of the plastic bag with the tags on.
Okay, got it.
No, I'm good. Well, here are some of the results that we plan to really benefit from and really identify. As a result of our effort, we're going to have more consistent programs. We will be a lot more predictable in terms of what we're doing and how it needs to be done. Our maintenance, to be preventive instead of reactive. A reactive approach is by far the most expensive approach to any activity. And so that's going to allow us to gain some efficiencies as well. And then, you know, we put ourselves, as a result of standard operating procedures, as a result of those consistencies in those areas, we're going to be a little bit more methodical. Greg gave you a picture of the water main break in LA. I'm familiar with people that run that system. And one of the challenges that they faced is they've got old pipe that is the joints or the way they used to build skyscrapers with the rivets. And all of those joints are wearing out. Not only that, they had difficulties in a valve maintenance program that resulted in them losing tens of millions of gallons of water before they were able to get that isolated. Well, a predictive approach allows us to operate our valves on a frequent basis so we can alleviate those losses. You lose water, you lose time, you negatively inconvenience your customers to a much greater degree, and the methodical approach reduces a lot of that. Also, when we prioritize the assets and how we operate and maintain our assets, we really do begin to identify the best practices. And when you're identifying the best practices, you really move along the lines of being best in class, and that's what our goal is. And moving on, procedural standardization. It's a matter of when we are standard and when we're standardized procedurally, it does really reduce the possibility of injury and near misses. And so that's another value-added approach. It also helps us to really look for and to bring in the tools that are necessary to help us to be effective and efficient. And so those are some of the things as well. We talked a little earlier about the continuous improvement. Dawn mentioned in her presentation earlier about once we get where we think we are, let's turn it over and look at it again. What are some things we can do to just tighten it up just a little bit to be a lot more efficient and to be more effective? And that results in us having value-added perspectives and customer needs. And so, in closing, this is what we have. No, this part is Greg. This is Greg's part here. So,
and I probably didn't do Rod and his team adequate justice when I went over those. But the items in terms of process improvement, taking care of the assets. I know in my conversations with Rod, his folks in facilities and in parks are committed to the same basic things. I probably skimmed over it a little bit too fast, so my apologies, sir. And that.
Are there any questions for me? And I'll turn it over to Greg if not.
What we're trying to do with our infrastructure now is take a holistic point of view that we need to do more than just build new, but we need to start putting a major focus on taking care of what we have and being prepared at some point in time to replace it when it does wear out, because it does. And the program that we've outlined is our way of trying to address that. So are there any questions besides the baseball thing, which I vote for the Tigers, I'm just saying.
We can get some visuals simply by looking at where Gilbert has been and where Gilbert is now, and so you start to see the types of drastic change. On the screen there, you can see a picture of Gilbert actually it wasn't even dated, so we'll just say several decades ago, as well as a picture of that very same intersection today. At the time, we were the hay shipping capital of the world. These days, as we know, with Orbital Sciences, we're actually going to be building more satellites in Gilbert, Arizona this year than any other city in the world. It's hugely impressive, but it also signifies great change, and the expectations of the government have changed as a result of that too. So you can look here at the chart. You see in 1920, basically it was incorporated with approximately 500 people. It wasn't very clear. Some of the documentation that showed the incorporated area was also very sketchy. We estimated about 2.3 square miles. But we energized our first traffic light in 1971. So even in the 1970s, we were still a very small community, and didn't energize our second traffic light until 1984. A lot of change has occurred in a very short period of time. So when we look at that type of change, even in recent history, and I might be dating myself here, but when I think of 1988, I don't really think of it as that long ago. Now, Mark and I took a little field trip to the area right behind the wall here, and one of the things that we found was a goal-setting session from 1988. And at the risk of distracting everyone with some things to take a look at, you'll notice that nice little typeset. One of the things that we thought was pretty neat.
And just real fast, the first traffic signal, I assume, was Elliott and Gilbert? And was the second one Guadalupe and Gilbert?
I believe it was actually, I had that list, but it was not. It was, I want to say Houston or somewhere along those lines. And then Page, I believe, was third. So okay. They were at some of the half-mile streets instead. Moving on, in a little more recent history, we had 1992, a nice little community profile. And 1992, I remember quite well. Again, I don't think of it that long ago. I think a nice shout out is in order to our digital team, because our community profiles look a little different than this now. But a couple of interesting facts when you look at Gilbert. Our police department at that point in time had 39 sworn officers and 21 civilian employees. Our operating budget in 1992 was $28 million, following actual expenditures in 1991 of $15 million. Our fire protection was done through a contract with Rural Metro Fire Department for fire protection services, with 3 stations served by a chief fire marshal and 12 full-time firefighters. Gilbert has truly changed. What we want to make sure we keep in mind is what we expect to see of Gilbert moving into the future. One more quick visual that I'll pass around. Because of our emphasis that we've had today and want to continue having on capital planning, this right here is a map of Gilbert in 1990. Look at where the infrastructure is, and look at where the streets are in 1990. And you can see the map actually only goes down as far as Ocotillo Road. And there aren't a lot of collector and residential streets other than in the northwest part of town. You heard yesterday from Dan and company, and then again from Ken and his group, about the importance of that northwest corridor as well, and making sure that we are paying attention to the infrastructure and learning to revitalize that area so that we can keep it as new as what we're seeing down in other parts of the community. The important distinction here is that it's all about balance. When we look at the long-term financial plan, and especially in our financial world, we love to get into the details, and we can get really buried in those details if we're not careful. We want to make sure we're looking at the vision, that we're working with council's guidance and strategic initiatives, and that we're keeping that big picture in mind. So there's an art and a science to this. And so if I can draw some attention to you real quick, I'm going to challenge you, actually, because we talk a lot about data and details, to share with us the importance of right-brain thinking in long-term financial plan. What would you consider to add value? Although I know you love challenges, so.
Interesting. I would say the creativity and envisioning things and, yeah, being creative and looking forward.
But now I'll give you an opportunity to talk about the risk if we simply used right brain.
It's one thing to have an idea of how things might work. It's another thing to put the pieces together and actually make it come together, right?
Thank you. So the importance here is that we're really looking at where these come together, that we make sure we have the right data, that we're measuring the right things, that we have the right financial details in order, but that we're doing it with the right vision in mind, and that we're doing it with that creativity, not loosey-goosey, but actually looking out and discovering ways of doing business better.
So I was unfair to myself. I actually got 2 awards in junior high. I got the art award and I got the math award. Just saying. Just saying.
New nickname for Victor, Sweet Spot. Ken, Pin Ken, Sweet Spot.
But if we can't tell the story, and if we don't have the picture, those details quickly become jumbled. How many of you are familiar with TED Talks? I love TED Talks because you can learn just about anything in a very, very short period of time. Now, Simon Sinek is one of my favorites, and his TED Talk I'd recommend you take a look at is about 15 minutes long. We're not going to take 15 minutes, but I did find a little video clip of his that I wanted to share with you. And as that's coming up, the important thing to note, and this comes back to what you heard from Ken a moment ago, is that it all comes back to remembering why we're doing what we're doing.
I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat-screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat-screen TVs. They've been making flat-screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. And Dell came out with MP3 players and PDAs. And they make great quality products, and they can make perfectly well-designed products, and nobody bought one. In fact, talking about it now, we can't even imagine buying an MP3 player from Dell. Why would you buy an MP3 player from a computer company? But we do it every day. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. When we communicate from the outside in, yes, people can understand vast amounts of complicated information like features and benefits and facts and figures. It just doesn't drive behavior. When we communicate from the inside out, we're talking directly to the part of the brain that controls behavior, and then we allow people to rationalize it with the tangible things we say and do. This is where gut decisions come from. Sometimes you can give somebody all the facts and your figures, and they say, I know what all the facts and details say, but it just doesn't feel right. Why would we use that verb? It doesn't feel right. Because the part of the brain that controls decision-making doesn't control language. And the best we can muster up is, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Or sometimes you say you're leading with your heart, or you're leading with your soul. Well, I hate to break it to you, those aren't other body parts controlling your behavior. It's all happening here in your limbic brain, the part of the brain that controls decision-making and not language. But if you don't know why you do what you do, and people respond to why you do what you do, then how will you ever get people to vote for you or buy something from you, or more importantly, be loyal?
Important takeaway here is that it's not that we don't need details, it's not that we don't need to understand what we do, but as you heard earlier, our silent servants in public works, keep in mind why they do what they do, why we provide public service, why it's important. And that's a huge component of the long-term financial plan, and one that we want to make sure we don't lose sight of. When we think of long-term financial plans on the surface, a lot of times we're thinking of the data, of the analysis, of the policies, and all of those things that are so critical to the success of a long-term financial plan. But it's also the community, it's also the citizens, it's also the service. And it's also the vision, and that's what we're asking from council, to make sure that we as staff are moving forward in the right direction. Financial planning, again, we have talked a lot about vision, and we come to council each year, as you said, Mayor, looking for that vision, making sure that as we enter into the budget process for the upcoming year, and as we move forward with our long-term planning, that we have council's vision in mind for the community, so that that's the basis for which we make our decisions. We've talked a lot about the policies, about the analysis, about the forecasting, but we want to talk to you a little bit about what that means in terms of collaboration and what that means in terms of connection. Because as you hear about the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and the Transportation Master Plan and all of these other planning efforts, and tying into the general plan and those long-term visions for what the community looks like, all of these things need to tie back to each other. Your long-term financial plan needs to be a reflection of these plans and what you're trying to accomplish. and help you to actually accomplish those goals. You will continue to see the slide because it's really a basis and a framework for that long-term financial plan and helps us to explain how those components all work together. We're going to go through some examples of a few of these very, very quickly. You're going to see a lot of detail on some slides that's just simply meant to provide some imagery because you'll be getting the actual plan here shortly. And so I want to give you a sense of what you can expect here in the next several weeks. When we talk about our fiscal environment, we're really looking at where are we at today and what are the major drivers that we need to keep our eyes on. So we'll look at the general fund, and then we'll look at a breakout of what makes up the general fund. When we start looking at the general fund in particular, sales tax is a huge component of that, both state and local sales tax. And one of the things we want to make sure we understand is what are the components of that sales tax and what's the likelihood that they're going to continue at the level that they are right now. So we break out the various categories of sales tax, keeping in mind those sections of it that are perhaps either that are maybe not as sustainable as others. So construction is the one that we talk about the most when we look at recurring levels of revenues. We fully anticipate we're going to continue seeing construction activity over the next few years. But we also fully anticipate that as we approach build-out, that's not going to be the case. And that's not our sustainable level of revenue for the construction side. So we look at what we would expect to see in construction compared to retail. As we build more and more commercial, and especially as we, and we're not talking about simply another grocery store, another Target, where people can move within the same community. But as we have those dedicated areas, the American Furniture Warehouse, the Riviera properties, those types of opportunities that are coming up in the town, that's going to drive an increased level of retail sales tax that we can anticipate. But again, we want to make sure that we're balancing that with what we anticipate from construction as well. One example of how we're breaking down individual revenue sources within the town in our fiscal environmental analysis. As I mentioned, I'm going to put a slide up here that's just going to give you a snapshot of what some of that overview would look like. And you'll have an opportunity to absorb that all when you actually get the report. The important thing to note here is as we break down those revenue and expenditure sources, you'll be able to see whether it's favorable with some caution, whether it's caution or whether there's a warning here, and then whether or not it's unfavorable. You will not see anything going on in the town right now that's unfavorable, but we will keep an eye on that, and there's a lot of detail in that report that will help you understand what each of those categories means. And then you'll see a chart over the last several years of each of those revenue sources, and a break, and so you can see how they've trended in terms of the actuals. And then there'll be detail explaining each of them and what we're actually seeing in terms of trends. On the long-range revenue side, again, it's more than maybe initially meets the eye. We certainly look, as we mentioned, with the sales tax, we look at the cyclicality of the revenues, we look at the volatility of certain types of revenue sources and the structure of it in and of itself. But we also look at other items. What are some of the issues that are within our control here at either the council or the staff level? We look at issues that may be completely outside of our control. But in a lot of cases, we look at what are the things that we can influence. And last year, for example, as we were talking about the transaction privilege tax or TPT legislation, we had our mayor out there helping to influence the outcome of that to make sure that the town's revenue streams were intact. So all of these things come into play when we look at our long-range revenue forecast. On the expenditure side, again, there's a big difference when we look at operating versus capital. Operating is looking at build-out. What does this community look at? What are the services that we need to provide? And then what are the ways in which we can provide those services? Lean and Lean Six Sigma really plays a huge impact in that, as do many other things. That's just an example of one of the ways that we can make sure that we're optimizing our processes so that we can move forward in a lean manner, which doesn't mean just simply frugal. It means that we're able to provide those services in the most efficient and effective way possible. On the capital side, we want to make sure with both the capital improvement program that has been focused on expansion and growth over the years, that we now start to incorporate in major reconstruction, rehabilitation, those major maintenance issues, and then program in with the long-range infrastructure program, the programmatic maintenance that you heard earlier on. Oh, I wanted to, when we talk about cost escalation here, that's not just a given, and I think that's a really important thing to note. We want to make sure that we understand cost escalation, that we look at what inflation is likely to be, that we're truly digging into growth and what we anticipate growth to be, but not just simply plug something in and let it run out. We look again for what the most likely scenarios are, what the information that we have available to us from a variety of different sources, both local and national, and apply those types of factors, and then overlay the opportunities for efficiency to make sure that we're not just simply trending it out based on percentages and not paying attention to what some of our options and opportunities are. So briefly on the debt analysis, there's an entire section in the long-range financial plan that addresses debt analysis. There are a couple of areas in particular that I wanted to highlight today, especially given the conversations we've had recently with our rating agencies. You can see when you compare us to the average communities for Moody's for their AAA and their AA ratings, where we're starting to move toward that AAA. And what you'll find in most of these areas here is that this is really positive, positive movement that we're seeing here in the town of Gilbert. There are a couple areas in particular that they continue to highlight in terms of the differentiation between our now AA plus ratings and our AAA, and that's going to be our direct debt as a percentage of full value, but the other thing is our revenues. And so it's really one of the things that we've been working with, that our consultants from WebWish have been working with as we talk to those rating agencies, is helping them understand that just because our revenues are lower than other communities of the same size, that really is a reflection of the fact that we're able to do things more efficiently. That's actually a good thing. And so we're really working with them to try and change that paradigm a little bit and make sure that we can accurately communicate. They do recognize that the direct net debt as a percentage is really a reflection of the growth communities. What they haven't seen, where we're really setting a new bar, is a community such as ours that is doing things as well as we are, that really is setting the bar in many of these cases, and it's still considered a growth community. When you look at the other AAA communities, you don't see growth communities. You see mature communities that have reached a balance and have figured out how to continue to operate very, very well and at a very high level. So what our task is and what our challenge is to help the rating agencies understand that we really are sustainable. Even though we're changing, even though we're only at 2/3 build out, even though we're going to have to continue to build infrastructure, and they're going to see our debt levels at the areas where you see other high growth communities, we have everything in place and will continue to have everything in place to be a sustainable, trustworthy, low-risk government.
Hey, Dawn, could I insert something real quick?
Absolutely.
Another point we push with them is just because we're taking on debt to fund the infrastructure necessary for growth, that we pay down our debt much faster than our peer communities do. And that's something that they should take into account as they evaluate our financial stability and sustainability.
I'm so glad that you said that. When we look at the averages, the average of the AAA communities was paying, the average life of the debt was about 13 to 14 years, and ours was 10.65. So that is one of the things that they highlight, that while our debt is very high up there, we pay it off faster than what you would see in other areas. And so it's, again, having that conversation that says we're a little bit different, but in many ways we're a lot better. Look at our long-term financial plan. We try and take that 5-year plan and break it out to a great deal more detail. The first thing you're going to notice is that great big red number, the negative $27 million down there on the general fund. And before you let that alarm you, that's really a reflection of a lot of the carry forward of capital and those types of things, as well as the full amount of contingency in that year, where council has asked that we actually budget the amount of contingency above the minimum fund balance. So that's not the amount that we anticipate spending in this year. And again, it's also a reflection of carry forward from revenues that were not expended last year. So you'll see this every year. You'll typically see the negative in the first year because we're showing that full drawdown. You don't have to absorb all of the details on this today, though. You'll be getting this yourselves here very shortly. So the gap that we've been talking to you about and that we'll continue to work through to address, this is something that we want to have the conversations right now, because we have in the next, particularly in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have some challenges in front of us. One of the things that you saw in Gabe's presentation before was the amount of infrastructure that was built in a very short period of time. And when you see what has been put into the ground over the last 10 years, it's easy to recognize then what our needs are going to be in 30 and 40 years. And because those same revenues that we use to build them cannot be used to rebuild them, to reconstruct them, to rehabilitate them, we need to start having those conversations about the structure of the revenues and how we look towards funding those types of costs in the future. So there are a couple of different ways. Obviously, when we talk about pay-as-you-go, that's going to come from operating revenues, and that's either going to be through taxes or rates. With the debt, we're going to talk a little bit about where our existing debt is right now. Look at our existing voter authorization that has not yet been applied towards any bond issues, and then a quick overview of what it would look like for a 2016 election. So our GO debt is backed by our secondary property tax. In Arizona, there's a primary and a secondary property tax. Gilbert does not have a primary property tax. Gilbert has a secondary property tax. So secondary property tax can only be used to retire debt. So we use it for our debt service payments for our general obligation bonds. This is really meant so that to make sure that there's a direct correlation between the property owners and the infrastructure that's put into place to support those properties. As you can see, there are a couple of areas where we have sold bonds. When you look at 2007 and 2008, that's really a reflection of the freeway and some of the efforts that we undertook to make sure that we had continuity there around the freeway. And then you can see in 2010 some additional the additional bond sale. Again, primarily this has been dedicated towards transportation. As Patrick had pointed out earlier, you can see the efforts that Gilbert makes, though, to pay those bonds off quickly and regularly as we move along. So this is what Council had seen before when we were talking about the property tax rate. Obviously, next year, because of the way the debt was initially scheduled, we have a higher debt service payment, but then it's fairly level over the next few years. The important thing to note here is that our existing GO will be paid off in 2023. The greatest challenge is going to be, what do we do about the infrastructure needs that we have now before 2024? And so those are some of the conversations that we wanted to begin with Council. Right now, in terms of available bond authorization, this is legal authorization. In 2001, there was there's $11 million remaining from voter authorization for parks, and then there is $71 million approximately remaining from the 2007 election for streets. We can certainly talk about capacity. There's a couple of different types of capacity. There's a constitutional capacity here in Arizona, and Gilbert has remained incredibly low in that. So constitutional capacity, meaning the state law or state constitution that governs how much debt we can have outstanding compared to what our total value is. We are not even at halfway of our constitutional capacity. So constitutional capacity is not a restriction for us. The restriction that we have in terms of capacity is our ability to repay it, and that's going to be based on the secondary property tax collections. So right now, we are, as we talked about during the budget process, the new state law requires that we only levy the taxes necessary for that year's debt service payment. And so the effective rate, I think, that Council set to make sure we can make the debt service payment this year was about $1. It was under $1. The November 2016 election, it would really be looking for authorization to move forward with some of our transportation projects, some of the parks projects, and then there are a few public safety projects in there as well. And so we'll be coming back to Council with more specifics on those items. If you look at the timing backing up from that November election, we really need to begin, we need to begin now in the planning process. But by next August, by the next retreat, we would need to have specific direction from Council. And then we would be looking for community input and such, as well as we looked in that project identification and discussion area there. I wanted to tie back to some of the slides that you saw during the budget process, which is again about the why, making sure that we can continue to provide service to our customers in the manner that that they really have come to appreciate, as you can see from the citizen satisfaction surveys. You had brought up, Victor, you'd brought up some great points regarding the use of fund balance, and that's going to be a big part of the long-term financial plan that you're going to see coming before you here in a few weeks. One of the things as we look at the operating funds is determining that right level of contribution into the repair and replacement funds, and we've been doing that with the water and wastewater funds. And so as we look at some of those needs and the ability to use pay-as-you-go, that's exactly one of the ways in which we're doing that. And as Gabe and Ken and Greg had mentioned earlier, this long-range infrastructure program is really helping us to identify what those appropriate levels would be. What can we anticipate moving forward that we're going to need in terms of those types of revenues? So that's a really big part of that. So one of the biggest components that may address some of those questions that you or statements that you brought up earlier would be that fund balance analysis contained there within the long-term financial plan. Did this, as you know, we did this comprehensive utility rate study and had a model built for the town. And a couple of you had the opportunity to actually walk through that model, and it's pretty comprehensive and a lot of detail in there. We have time to talk through this, and so what we want to be able to do is make sure that when council goes to set the rates for next year, which we'll need to do in June, that you're prepared to make a decision that you're comfortable with, that represents your interests, your policies, and the interests of the community. So I'm going to introduce just a couple of quick ideas, but we want to try and get it back on track a little bit. We'll be coming back with you for more conversation about this. Ultimately, as you know, when we look at those, and this is something that you saw before, we're looking at this from a number of different vantage points, just as we have talked about in a lot of different ways, making sure that ultimately it's fair and equitable distribution of costs. The most important thing that I want to highlight to you right now is that the initial report, the report itself and the initial information that you have before you, the direction to our consultant was basically do the math. Let's take a look at what it costs to provide the service and what those major cost drivers are, and just give us the results of that, and then we can come back to council and begin some policy level conversations. So the starting place right now is basically the math that says here's where those costs reside. When we talk about, we got a little caught up on rate versus revenues. This is the rate generated revenue that we're looking at here. Depending on what council moves forward with in terms of a structure for those rates, some rate payers may see an increase, some may not, depending on that structure. So we wanted to just be clear when we talk about 2% beginning in 16 for water, that's just the overall amount that's going to be necessary to support those operations and the debt service coverage ratios. So there's just a couple of seeds that we wanted to plant today for future conversations related to this. And I know we seem to be like in just the wrong place here. So with the cost allocation, we talked about variable versus fixed. But this is really looking at, in the past, we just kind of had a fixed basis for the distribution, and it's been in that place for a long time. As we've grown, we've seen that some of the cost drivers then aren't necessarily recognized in this. And so the consultant's recommendation, if you wanted to really capture where those costs are being driven, would be to go to more of a variable basis. And the real key factor there is specific to water. And in most cases, we're looking at economies of scale. So the more we buy, the lower rate that we get per each. With water, that's not the case, because we're talking about a scarce and finite resource that we can get a certain amount for a lower cost, but as we need more and more and more, that's coming at a higher cost. And so recognizing that rather than economies of scale, when we look at water acquisition, we're looking at just the opposite. The other one that came to mind as we were having some conversations then was in looking at the cost distribution for the environmental services. On the residential side in particular, we have right now a cost for for pickup for the first can and a separate cost for the second can. As a consultant came in and actually broke out those costs, if you were to allocate the actual costs per can, the cost for the first can would be a little bit higher and the cost for the second can would be a little bit lower because they're already there, they're already picking up the can. It's really just the additional weight and the additional tipping fees that we would need to make up. So the policy conversation there is do we want to do it just based exactly on cost for the environmental services, or do we want to look at some of the initiatives that council's put forward for diversion towards recycling programs? And then we'll have an opportunity to discuss any other types of policy conversations that council would like with that as well.
Before we rolled out continuous quality improvement, what we refer to as CQI. Okay. And then in 2012, continuing that effort, we rolled out and adopted Franklin Covey's 4 disciplines of execution. So as you're well aware, this was the introduction of WIGs, wildly important goals, where you take 1 or 2 highly important goals, focus on those, and achieve them with excellence. And then you move on to the next couple. So this year, we're looking to employ some concepts from Lean and Six Sigma. How do we go about doing that? When we look at the foundation that's already been laid on continuous improvement, we want to ensure that anything we do going forward, we complement those efforts. So we look at proven tools and techniques. This is an example you may remember from Don's presentation. It's an A3. We look at those tools and techniques and we employ those that we feel would fit with the organization and the foundation that's already been laid. When we look at what we're trying to do, we want to make sure the town is at a very unique situation. We continue to grow, but we also have aging infrastructure, as you've heard through all the presentations of the last couple of days. So we want to make sure when going forward that we're very strategic and deliberate and we're planning. How do we go about doing that? Well, we have an assortment of tools and processes. We have internal capacity, trained staff to be able to help with those innovations and efficiencies. And then, as always, we want to measure and celebrate those successes. And so when we do that, we want to look at what are the hard dollar savings, which will have an underlying budget impact, but we may only see on some of our innovations soft dollar savings, which is, when I say soft dollar, another term you can use is cost avoidance. So what we might see in some of these improvements is that we have been able to free up capacity and put them on more mission critical jobs or tasks. And so that would result in soft dollar savings. Also service level improvements. Another success, if we have a customer who comes in and gets either a pool permit or a reservation and they walk away with a smile on their face and say, that was the best service I've ever received. That's a win. That's a success for us. And that's what we want to get to and be at. And then there is that human development component. When we standardize processes, we're able to easily cross-train. And then that makes sure that we have that capacity internal in the event that we lose people or we have turnover. Somebody else can step in and easily take over. So there's the human development side. So we're 6 months into the program, and we've had executive team outreach, kind of a high level, what is Lean and Six Sigma, what is the difference and how does it fit into the organization. We've had the opportunity to go out and do some process mapping events. You heard Ken speak of earlier, we were able to work with several of his divisions. We've also gone out and worked with Parks and Rec. Those events have resulted in standardization, some elimination of redundancies. We also had the opportunity to go and work with the e-citation software rollout. This was a multi-departmental effort. There's 3 different departments involved. This was already in play, and so typically you wouldn't want to come in at the very beginning of the process. However, they were kind enough to let us come in, map the current state, and then map the future state. And it was an exciting event because what we were able to do is when you do process mapping, you're able to connect the dots. And I think that the people who were involved from the departments were able to see how what they do affects other departments. And so it was a very beneficial process. They can now take those maps and use those for standard operating procedures as well as for training down the road. And we currently have approximately 4 events already in the works. or are scheduled. Because we take continuous improvement very seriously, we do want to make sure that we have internal capacity that is trained and qualified to teach, to learn the tools, train on the tools, and then to go out and facilitate the events. To date, we have 4 staff members that are going through the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt Certification Program, and that is through the George Washington University Center for Excellence in Public Leadership. We also just had 2 staff members complete the Lean Black Belt Certification class, which is a 4.5-day event under the Denver Peak Academy, and very exciting class. It teaches you the tools to help identify waste and then to eliminate waste. With any, with Lean and Six Sigma in particular, a lot of people associate those terms with manufacturing. However, there are a lot of agencies, government and hospitals and different agencies, service organizations that have employed these concepts. So it's important when we look to integrate that into this town that we network with those agencies and we learn from best practices. We learn what worked and what didn't work. And so we're doing a lot of networking. And we also want to make sure that we're tracking and celebrating those innovations. And again, we're not the first to go lean. This is an example, a list of some of the agencies that have already incorporated some concepts of Lean and Six Sigma. Denver, Colorado, that's the one where we just did the Lean Black Belt certification program. They actually, the mayor mandated that they were to form this Peak Academy under the umbrella of the county and city. And that was as a result of a deficit. And they've been running the program now for, I want to say, 2.5 years. They brought down their deficit. They actually have full-time staff, 7 full-time staff that run this academy. And the goal is to eventually have all employees go through it. So an exciting program. I can provide links to any of these if anybody's interested. Where are we heading? 1 year into the program, what we would like to be able to say is that we have expanded outreach and education to at least half of the departments in the town. And again, just explaining what we can do, some of the tools that we have available at our disposal, and then hold 4 major Lean events. So this would be in addition to what we've already done. And then we would like to see a full integration of Lean with the CQI program that's already established.
Hey, Amber, before you move on, I had mentioned what we were doing with the CIP process earlier. Would you give them a couple of other examples of some of the big projects on the horizon? Mm-hmm. And about 5, 4.
3, 2, 1. Okay, so I said we are working, looking. One of the classes, the class that we're doing with George Washington University, we're tasked with taking a project through, and that's the CIP. Outside of that, though, we've already started some mapping events. We have a very large-scale one coming up with finance, and it's going to be on the purchasing process. And so that's a very exciting endeavor. We've also begun efforts working with Parks and Rec, Community Services that reached out to us and asked us to come in, look at some of their processes and see how we can streamline. And then we have been very active with the Water Division, and we continue to go through their different divisions and work with them on their processes. Okay, with any process improvement, you want to ensure that you have executive support. So it is critical to the success of Lean, and we want to make sure that we not only reach out to the directors and help them understand what their roles and responsibilities are, but to the supervisors and the managers, because again, when you're looking at any kind of continuous improvement, people need to be comfortable coming forward and saying, I believe that there's a room for improvement. They need to know that they're supported in that effort. And so we want to reach out to the executives. We want to hold those formal trainings, not only helping them understand their roles and responsibilities, but where they can help us find the innovation rooms for improvement, but also supporting the staff. And then we want to ensure that we have an elevator speech. It's like a 30-second, what is this? And that ensures consistent messaging across the board, the organization. And I want to leave you with this. This was a fun little event that we did with the Water Division. It's called a Gemba Walk. And Gemba is Japanese for actual place. So you actually go out to where the work is being performed, where the value exists for the customer. This was the, like I said, the water division. It was a fire hydrant maintenance, but this was kind of a fun project because it turned into a repair. So we go out in the field, we look at the work being performed, we observe, take notes, pictures, then we go back into the classroom. We establish a beginning and an end, and then the workers actually fill in everything in between. So they go step by step, this is the work that I do. When you map it out like this, you're actually able to see where there are redundancies or duplication of effort. A lot of times in these discussions, what comes up is, I didn't know you were doing that. And so it's neat to see that aha moment when people are like, I didn't realize. And you also get to see, because you want all parties involved, so anybody who's involved in the process should be in the room. You're able to see how what you do, again, affects other people in the process. We then take that and put it into a flow chart. These are called swim lanes, and these are the different stakeholders or people that are involved in the process. Again, there's a beginning and end point, and we're able then to identify areas to recommend for improvement or streamlining. And again, the result is we're able to take that, put it into a standard operating procedure. You now have a visual map as well as a standard operating procedure which can be used for training, cross-training, and then to ensure consistency across the board.
That I've been here understanding what it truly costs to deliver our services, how much we recover by service category so that we can then have some policy discussions about what's right for our community. So for this upcoming fiscal year, we are back to our zero base year for our budgeting process, and it was an excellent time to now kick this process off in earnest because part of our zero-based, priority-based budgeting process is understanding all of our service lines and then breaking those service lines down and understanding what it costs to deliver each one of them. So it ties in very nicely with that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn. She's going to talk to you about how we're going to approach this this year.
Thank you, Patrick. So when we talk with you about the cost of services, a lot of times we're talking from a very macro level. Those services that we provide, such as most of the services provided in public safety, our parks, those types of things that provide general public benefit, that's usually where we want to make sure that we're applying our taxes because we want those general tax dollars that come in to provide that general public benefit. But we also provide a lot of services that have a very specific benefit or a very specific beneficiary. And so if someone comes in to take a recreation class or pull a building permit or perhaps they don't consider it a benefit, but get stopped for a traffic violation. Those types of things where there's a specific person or a specific entity involved, we want to be able to have that cost, as Victor was saying earlier, offset specifically by that beneficiary. And that's where you get into what we consider user fees. So our user fees, as we mentioned, are prevalent in the development services area where someone's getting a very specific benefit for permit, plan review, inspections, those types of things, parks and recreation, and in public safety. Also, because we talk about rates separately, we oftentimes forget that our rates really are a user fee as well, and it recovers the cost of providing that service. So for this particular year, and it's actually a perfect segue, thank you. We are going through that zero-based process. The town does that every 3 years to make sure that we have our budget in the most relevant places and that we are, in fact, looking at how we do business and that we're reflecting the cost of doing business in the upcoming year. So we'll go through that. We're going to identify those processes then that are associated with the fees. That takes it a little bit of a different approach, and that's going to be a lot of work on the department. You're going to see that we're doing a lot this year. You saw all of the goals that Carrie had presented to you for the upcoming fiscal year and that Patrick had presented as well. There's a lot going on. This is not easy, and it's going to be a lot of work on the department levels, and we recognize that. And so the OMB staff is prepared to help the departments work through those. As we look at those processes, we look at the services, but we have to break those down now into those tasks and activities in many cases to recognize the fees. Because when you pull a building permit, there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just simply the actual the permit fee itself, but now you're looking at plan reviews, you're looking at the cost of inspections, those types of activities, and then recognizing what is involved in the workload and in the resources that are allocated to make that happen. So we cost those things out. And that's how we'll get back to determining the cost for those particular activities and processes. So we'll be looking at this on a town-wide level. There are a few fees that are out there, such as a copying fee in the clerk's office and such, that will also be addressed. And at the end, what we'd like to do is have a comprehensive list of all the fees in town where we can go to and see what they all are, as well as breaking out the specific areas in the individual departments. But there are going to be basically 4 areas that are going to be primarily impacted by this. Development services, this is going to be a huge undertaking for both development services and for parks and recreation. But we tend to forget sometimes public safety as well. Different types of fines and fees. Many of them are actually statutorily governed, and that makes that a very clear-cut analysis, and others are not. So we'll be looking at how these fees are calculated, what the basis is for them, and what the appropriate fee is. Again, if it's already determined by statute, that makes that one pretty simple and pretty cut and dry. And then we say public works, again, because we'll continue to work through the results of the rate study, take a look at updating our long-term plan for those enterprise funds, and then come back with you at the end of that for a recommendation for those rates as well. So when we talk about those rates, there's a couple of different overlays to that. One, and very much as we said with the utility rates, what's the actual cost of providing the service, and being able to break that out, and coming back to you with the math, basically, that's the basis for those. We'll be looking at that this year through the budget process to analyze those costs. And then when we talk about the appropriate distribution of those costs, again, that means when we look at the cost of providing an aquatics program and the lifeguards and all of those types of things, what is the basis for distributing that to the class participants, the open swim, those types of things? And so we'll look at those. And then ultimately we'll be looking to make a recommendation to update the existing fees. That is an awful lot to bite off in 1 year, especially given everything else that's going on right now. There's more to fees than just this, and so we're going to continue moving forward and making sure that as in the future we address those as well. So, for example, as we talk with council about the level of cost recovery, we've had some of those conversations as well, and what is most appropriate where. So we'll look at what the cost is to provide the service, what that cost recovery is as a basis of that, and then we'll look to council to have that policy level conversation. And then we'll look at the fee structure. In many cases, Gilbert, having grown as quickly as it did, still has the same fees in place as it did 10, 15 years ago, and perhaps that's not as reflective of the activities as it may need to be. Or maybe there are industry standards now that we could adopt or at least take a look at in terms of best in class. And so we'll be doing that later on as well. So this is more of our long-term plan then for the fee structure. This year in particular, we're going to be focused on that the zero-based budget process, the cost of service analysis, and updating our existing fees. Any questions?
Next section is going to be talking about organizational strategic goals. We're going to start off with a short video on how this is done.
For the last few years, Franklin Covey has been fascinated with the topic of execution. We've thought more about it than perhaps anyone on the planet. We've asked ourselves, why is it that execution, the ability to deliver on our most strategic goals and priorities, ultimately breaks down in so many organizations? You probably won't be surprised to know that organizations that execute well do 4 things very consistently. First of all, the people actually know the goals of the organization. Second, they know what to do to achieve the goals. Third, they know how they are doing against the measures of the goals. And fourth, there's clear accountability for results. We don't want to be oversimplistic here, but ultimately, the ability to execute is summed up in these 4 attributes.
a goals dashboard here in Gilbert where we track all of our goals. This is accessible on the town website for all of our residents to go to as well, and they can see what those wildly important goals are most of the time that the organization is focused on and working on in any given fiscal year. Kramer? Is this best in class, Kramer? There it is. Okay. Yeah, so you'll see, and all of our strategic goals are aligned with one of the 6 strategic initiatives that you as the council has given to us. Okay. Okay. So for last fiscal year 14, as we refer to it, in each one of the 6 categories, you can see the goals that we had under community livability, and I won't go through each one. I'll just hit on a couple. Parks and facility optimization, integrated transportation master plan, ISO community rating, under financial plan, the performance benchmarking, the long-range revenue forecast, infrastructure, the long-range infrastructure plans, economic development, the higher education strategy, high-performing government, the pay-for-performance strategy, the leadership development strategy, communication strategy. So again, these are those wildly important goals that we focus on as an organization, and when Carrie comes up here in just a minute, she's going to show you how these goals then cascade through our performance management program so that we create that alignment within the organization from the very front level, bottom frontline employees, all the way up to the very top, which is the council at a policy level. Fiscal year 15, the goals again, I'll just highlight a couple. Parks Master Plan Phase 1 implementation, the detention holding facility. Under technology leader, the development services permit system implementation. Under financial plan, zero-based budgeting. Under economic development, the higher education strategy implementation, the tourism strategic plan. And again, under high-performing government, the performance management system phase 2 implementation, leadership development implementation, process optimization. So again, these are those high-level goals that we set as an organization, and we identify, and then we cascade that through the organization so that every employee understands what we're working on, what our focus is, where they fit into that, and what area they're responsible for, so that when we execute on this, we do it very effectively and very efficiently. And then to recap, again, how this is built, it starts with our mission, vision, and values, and then goes to the strategic initiatives and goals set by the council, and then the department and individual goals, and then the results that we see, much of which you have seen over the last 3 days. So we've got one last WIG video we're going to show Julie.
Yes, there's a star in the room. His name is Kurt.
Town of Gilbert has 22 boards and commissions. In general, the authority for these boards are derived from the code, state statutes, or council directive. Click. Works much better when you do it. We tried to divide the 22 into broad categories. This is more art than science, is what we're calling it, but they're regulatory policy, pension retirement or trust, and then the third category is discretionary. We have a total of 9 that fit into regulatory policy. They provide council with assistance on policy discussions or decisions, or they play some type of regulatory role. These are the 4 that we're probably the most familiar with. Move on. Pension retirement or trust, usually annual meetings, providing information to council. Again, not in need of a great deal of direction. Next, when we go to discretionary, we currently have 6. The top 3 are meeting. If you could click one more time. The bottom 3 are no longer meeting, but we wanted to point out Community Services Committee is an example of an assigned committee. There was a specific task. They met for a determined amount of time. They completed their task, made a recommendation to council, and then didn't meet until that particular task came up again. Special Events Commission is what we call an activated committee. So there was, again, a specific problem. So they met, discussed the issue, made the recommendations to council. In this case, council adopted a lot of them, and we incorporated them. So if we can move forward, the discussion that we want to have today on our only focusing on the discretionary boards and commissions is that we tend to have a misalignment between council and commission priorities. So we'll create, the commissions will create a work plan, and they either haven't gotten the direction from council to create that work plan, or they have gotten the direction, but they don't have the resources to complete it. That leads into our second point, is that we're not having regular meetings, which tends to lead to a lack of direction. The discretionary boards and commissions have been struggling with what is and what is not within their purview. They have a confusion about their role with the town, and then they tend to be staff intensive. So the resources that are actually being used on the discretionary boards and commissions outstrip what's actually been assigned. So if we can, the discussion we want to have today is we're not trying to find match a solution with the board, but we think in the universe of the discretionary boards and commissions, we want to do one of these four things. One, provide clarification on council direction. So if we don't, if we want to keep the boards and commissions meeting regularly, then we would like to have a specific and clear direction from the council on the outputs you would like to see. Two, if we don't want to provide additional direction to what they're getting, then we want to reduce the meeting frequency to align with what the town commitment is. So assignments stay the same, but we probably don't need to meet every month to achieve the outcomes. Three is we could change to an activated committee. We saw an example earlier. So as an issue arises, we'll have a standing board and committee that will meet. Mayor and council activate them. When the issue is resolved or recommendations have been made, that board will quit meeting. And then four, obviously we can continue as we are with no changes. It is a council's board and commission, and if they're meeting your needs, then we're happy to continue.